Hey, when are you coming back? It's already been 8 months, just come back already. My ex-husband suddenly showed up at my parents' house, acting as irrational as ever. After ignoring me for so long, now he wants me back. I looked at him coldly and said, "We're nothing to each other now. And besides, I'm married to someone else." My name is Lily, and I'm 35 years old. I work in an office. I've been married to my husband, Ryan, for 2 years. We met through a blind date set up by a friend. She was worried I was too focused on work and wouldn't meet anyone, so she arranged for us to meet. Ryan was there at the party, and we quickly became friends. I liked that he was the one to start conversations because I've never been good at romance. It's easier for me when the other person takes the lead. Ryan is 2 years younger than me, so we were close in age and had a lot in common. We exchanged numbers and started dating. About a year later, he proposed and we got married. I was happy to marry someone I loved, but after we got married, I realized there were things I hadn't noticed before. First, Ryan did absolutely no housework. He never cleaned or did laundry. He had always lived with his parents, but I assumed that, as an adult, he would at least take care of basic chores. But he had zero experience. He had never cooked before, and the last time he held a knife was in middle school home economics class. That was a red flag. It meant he expected me to do all the housework just because he didn't know how. And so my exhausting life began. Every morning, I woke up early to make lunch for both of us and prepare breakfast. After work, I rushed home to cook dinner. It was tough, especially when I was already tired from work. So I asked him, "Can you at least help with cleaning and laundry?" But he just said, "I've never done that before, so I don't know how." He didn't even try. I patiently told him, "I'll show you how, and we can do it together." But instead of learning, he just refused. At first, I thought I could handle it, but with my busy job, managing the house became overwhelming. Then, one day, Ryan complained, "Have you been slacking off on the chores? The house is dusty and my clothes aren't washed." This never happened when I lived at home. I was furious. "Then why don't you do some of the housework? Your mom was a housewife, but I have a full-time job. I don't have the same time she did." Instead of understanding, Ryan got mad. "What are you talking about? My mom took care of me and my brother while managing the house just fine. It should be even easier for you since we don't have kids." "No, but just do your job properly." I was exhausted and frustrated. I had been making healthy meals, packing lunches, and doing everything I could. Fine. If he didn't appreciate it, I'd make things easier for myself. I started cutting corners, gradually. For lunch, I used more store-bought bread. I relied on frozen meals for dinner, made quick rice bowls, and simplified everything. I cleaned lightly in the mornings and did a deep clean only on weekends. I used the dryer for most of the laundry instead of hanging things up. Ryan didn't even notice. As long as the house looked clean, he had no complaints, and he never realized I had stopped making elaborate homemade meals. I wish I had done this sooner. Reducing my workload gave me more energy for work. For 2 years, we lived like that. But then recently, Ryan started complaining again. It happened while I was taking out the trash. "What's this?" he asked. "What?" He grabbed the trash bag and started pulling things out. "Hey, what are you doing? Did you use this much frozen food?" He held up the packaging. "I told you not to slack off. A proper wife should be cooking real meals for her husband." That was the last straw. "I do all the housework, and I make things easier for myself. If you have a problem with it, then do it yourself." He looked stunned. "I've been using frozen food for nearly a year, and you never noticed. That means you were perfectly happy eating it. So don't act like you care now." Ryan had no response. He had never realized the difference. "Shut up. I didn't think you were such a terrible wife. Stop using frozen food from now on," he shouted before stomping off to his office. He was being completely unreasonable, or maybe he just felt the need to be in control all the time. After 2 years of marriage, I realized Ryan was full of useless pride. I was more frustrated with myself for not noticing this before marrying him. From that day forward, I decided I wouldn't let him push me around anymore. If he wasn't going to respect me, I wouldn't go out of my way to please him. Instead of making his lunch, I packed my own homemade meal and left $5 on the table for him. "What the hell is this?" he asked. "I'm tired of your constant complaints, so from now on, just buy your own lunch," I said. Isn't it your duty as a wife to make my lunch? There's no rule that says that. Don't be ridiculous. I won't allow you to slack off on housework. I don't care what you allow. And if you don't like it, I won't give you the $5 either. He looked irritated but grabbed the money anyway and stuffed it into his wallet. At least make it $10, he muttered. I almost laughed at how pathetic he sounded, so the next day, I decided to give him $10 from our household budget. Not having to make his lunch was a relief. We still argue from time to time, but I managed to carry on with our marriage. Some people might wonder why I stayed with someone like him, but I didn't want to rush into a divorce. It's easy to leave, but I didn't think it was right to give up on someone I once loved just because we had different values. No couple is a perfect match. I believe that with time, we could learn to compromise and accept each other's differences. That's why I kept going. But then one day, he did something that completely changed the way I saw our marriage. It happened suddenly. "Welcome home," I greeted Ryan as he walked in after work. No response. I thought maybe he hadn't heard me, so I just continued cooking dinner. He changed out of the suit, walked into the living room, and lay down on the couch to watch TV. Once dinner was ready, I called him. "Dinner's ready." Still nothing. He sat down, ate in silence, and didn't say a single word. I started to feel uneasy. Maybe something had happened at work. I let it slide. I knew that if I complained about Ben's attitude, it would just turn into an argument. But after finishing his meal, he got up from the table without a word. That annoyed me. "Can't you at least say thank you for dinner and put your dishes away?" I asked. He didn't reply. He just walked to his room with a blank expression. What's wrong with him? I muttered to myself. I cleared the table and washed the dishes. We hadn't argued recently, and I hadn't done anything to upset him, so I figured it had to be something else. But the next morning when I said, "Good morning," he ignored me. That evening when he came home, I greeted him with, "Welcome back," but he didn't say a word. Even during dinner, he wouldn't talk to me. This went on for days and my patience wore thin. "Why are you ignoring me?" I finally snapped. "If something is wrong, just say it. You can't just shut me out like this." Ben didn't even look at me. He just went to his room again. This silent treatment dragged on for a week. I got tired of it and stopped trying to talk to him. Days passed, then weeks. It had been nearly 2 weeks since we had last spoken. At this point, I didn't even know what his problem was. I was so sick of being ignored that I started thinking, why am I even cooking dinner for him? One evening, I simply decided not to cook. When Ben came home, he glanced at the empty dining table. He looked at me for a second, but didn't say anything. Then he grabbed his coat and left. What is this? How long is this going to go on? I started wondering if staying married like this was even possible. That's when I found the divorce papers. They were in a drawer, already signed by Ben. So he's already thinking about divorcing me. Something inside me snapped. Fine. If that's what he wants, I'll just submit them. I signed my part, took the papers to the office, and filed for divorce. Then I packed my things and went back to my parents' house. They were shocked when I showed up with my bags. But when I told them what happened, they were furious at Ben. I settled into my new routine, commuting to work from my parents' house. I never heard from my ex-husband. A week passed, then another. No calls, no messages. I figured he really didn't care. Part of me felt sad, but mostly, I was angry. I'm going to forget about that guy. And so I moved on. 8 months later, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. Thinking it was a delivery, I opened it without a second thought. There he was. Ben. I froze. He looked at me, his eyes widening in shock before his expression turned into anger. Hey, when are you coming back? It's been 8 months, so get your ass back here. Is he serious? After ignoring me for so long? I stared at him coldly. We're strangers now, I said. What are you talking about? We're married. Stop being ridiculous and come home. You're the one being ridiculous, I replied. You filled out the divorce papers. You signed them. I just submitted them. His face twisted in disbelief. What? You actually filed them? Of course. Why wouldn't I? You had them ready and signed. That means you wanted a divorce, right? It was just to scare you. I wasn't really going to divorce you. I shook my head. If you ignore me for weeks, ruin our marriage, and leave signed divorce papers lying around, how else am I supposed to take it? Ben continued, Well, I listened to my boss's advice. He said that since you always talked back, the only way to get you to listen was to completely ignore you and wait for you to come around. Then he suggested I confront you with the divorce papers, and that would make you apologize. I was disgusted. Your boss sounds terrible. How's his marriage going? His wife and kids left him recently. Of course they did. And don't you think you deserve a divorce after doing the same thing? Ben looked uncomfortable, but he was still stubborn. You'll be the one who struggles now that we're apart. You're older, and with a divorce on your record, no one will want to marry you. So why don't you come back to me? I'll make an exception for you. You don't want to be lonely, do you? Stop being stubborn and come back. I sighed and shook my head. I'm married to someone else. Ben's eyes widened in disbelief. Do you really think I'll fall for that? You're a terrible liar. I'm not lying, I replied. Want proof? I went to the bedroom and woke up my husband. He came to the door, still sleepy. When he saw Ben, his eyes widened. This is my husband. Ben was stunned. Wait, you're Lily's ex-husband. It's been a while. What do you want? Did you really remarry this man? Ben asked. That's exactly what I said. You were childhood friends, right? After my divorce, he supported me and we grew closer. We got married because we knew each other so well. Ben seemed shocked. Oh no. What are you doing here so early on a weekend? I asked. Ben stuttered. Well, now you know. I'm starting a new life. If you don't leave now, I'll have my husband call the police. Oh, I don't want that, Ben said quickly, rushing to leave. Then get out of here, I shouted, and he hurried away. My husband, my childhood friend, is a police officer. We grew up together, and when I got divorced, he came to comfort me. He told me I was his first love and had always had feelings for me. We ended up getting married because we knew each other so well. Now we're living happily together, and I'm pregnant. We're excited to welcome our baby into this new chapter of our lives. Ignoring your spouse is terrible. I'm so glad I found happiness with my dependable husband, and I hope Lily continues to live happily ever after too.
If the ownership of this house isn't transferred to me, I'm contemplating a divorce. I was taken aback when my husband suddenly dropped this bombshell. This house holds precious memories of our family, and I can't bear to part with it. Despite my emotional attachment, my husband is threatening me, toying with my feelings. Distraught, I reached out to my father for help. I am Emily, a 30-year-old full-time housewife, dedicating my days to supporting and managing our household. I married John 2 years ago, and since quitting my job after marriage, my husband has been the breadwinner. However, our peaceful life took a turn for the worse after my father-in-law's passing, leading to my mother-in-law moving into our apartment. Surprisingly, I was informed about my mother-in-law's move the day before she arrived. Nonchalantly, my husband announced her impending arrival as if it were the most natural thing. It caught me off guard, and I questioned the suddenness of it. I forgot to mention earlier that my mother would also be coming to live with us from tomorrow. As soon as my husband came home, he casually mentioned her arrival, asking me to prepare and clean up. I was bewildered by the news. I thought she was coming over for a visit, but my husband clarified that she was moving in. The decision was made without any prior discussion with me, and the very next day, my mother-in-law arrived with numerous luggages. It's been a while. I'm glad you look well, Mary. Please come in, I greeted her. However, she seemed displeased for some reason. As she entered, she questioned why I didn't come to pick her up, emphasizing that it's common sense to meet at the station, especially when you know your mother-in-law is arriving. While carrying the hefty luggages, I didn't know what time you'd arrive. In that case, shouldn't you have contacted me? You're so thoughtless. I apologize. This is why they say some daughter-in-laws are useless and inconsiderate. Grumbling, the mother-in-law settled heavily on the sofa. Despite being a guest in our home, she acted as if she owned the place. I couldn't believe it. From that day on, her snide comments became even more intense. As soon as my husband left for work, the barrage began. Emily, why are you sitting there? Do the dishes. You should have finished the laundry in the morning. That's common knowledge. I'm sorry, I'll do the laundry once the dishes are done. You have the wrong priorities. In my house, it's a rule to do laundry immediately after breakfast. But that rule is just to do as you're told. Haven't your parents taught you not to make excuses? I had my own daily routine, and it seemed that Mary couldn't understand that I wasn't refusing to do the work. Even if I did things her way, she would still find fault and complain every day. The daytime hours alone with her were especially challenging. One day, I had an epiphany on how to end this living hell with my mother-in-law. The plan was to move to the house I inherited from my father and live in a separate home from her. My father retired early a few months ago, and my parents started a new life in the countryside. They then passed on their house to me. Fortunately, that house isn't too far from our current apartment, and we were planning to move eventually. Living with my mother-in-law had reached my limits, so I decided to talk to my husband about moving sooner. John, can we talk for a moment? What's up? Anything happened? Remember the house my father gave us? What do you think about moving there? Oh, that house. We did talk about moving there someday. Why the sudden decision? Well, I've been having some difficulties with your mother. She never mentioned anything, but I can't bear living with her anymore. That's why I'm seriously considering moving. Observing that the new place isn't too far, I suggested we move there, allowing my mother-in-law to stay in the current apartment. Surprisingly, my husband agreed to the move. After informing Mary, we decided to make the move a week later. Honestly, I anticipated some opposition from her, but she accepted our decision with a big smile. Goodbye, John and Emily. I'm so sorry for the sudden decision to move. Don't worry about it. It's wonderful that your father gave you the house. He's very sweet. Thank you. Please visit us sometime. Of course, it's not too far from here, and I hope you visit me regularly too. I will. After the conversation, I headed to our new home with my husband, feeling relieved that I wouldn't have to endure snide remarks anymore. I could now live freely at my own pace. Although I had initially feared Mary's opposition, consulting with John brought me peace. However, my peace did not last. Despite being able to keep my distance from my mother-in-law and reduce stress, my husband started coming home late. It wasn't just the late returns. There were days when he wouldn't come home at all. He defended his actions, saying he was worried about his mother, but it became too frequent. Without informing me, he went to her house, had dinner with her, and sometimes stayed overnight, disrupting my daily life. This can't go on, I thought one day. I sat him down for a talk. John, you've been coming home really late lately, and sometimes you don't even come home at all. Is that so? I'm just worried about my mother. That's not the point. At least let me know beforehand that you'll be late, so I'll know I don't have to prepare dinner. Since you're a housewife and always at home, you can eat the leftovers for lunch the next day, right? So you're saying I should just accept everything quietly because I'm a housewife. Are you saying we shouldn't talk about this? Isn't that the truth? Housewives just relax at home. What? What are you saying? Anyway, I'm worried about leaving my mother alone. Ellie will be coming back soon, and I need to discuss some things with her. Wait, Ellie is coming back. What does he need to discuss with her? Curious, I asked my husband. We're moving Ellie here to live with us. Live together? Yes, she kept saying she wanted a big house like the one she lived abroad. That's why I thought of letting her stay in this house. What? I don't understand. Suddenly informed of this, I couldn't think of anything. Is my sister-in-law going to live in this house? I had barely escaped from Mary's constant complaints, and now his sister, Ellie, was going to live in this house. I couldn't wrap my head around it. This was the house I inherited from my father. It felt unnatural. It's the only big house that would satisfy Ellie, my husband argued. The apartment where we used to live is now where my mother stays, and it's too small for 4 people. But I never intended to live with Ellie. I don't plan to live together either. I intend to give this house to Ellie, my husband declared. What? Why? Because we plan to move back with my mother. Ellie can use this house freely, he explained. I was taken aback by my husband's unreasonable proposal and felt like fainting. Despite my repeated insistence that I had no intention of living with my mother-in-law, my husband eventually became furious. "Can't you be a little more considerate? You can live because of me, so just do as I say. Enough is enough of your jokes. This house is precious to me, inherited from my father. Why should I give it to Ellie? Such a wonderful house is wasted on you, isn't it? I've already told Ellie that I've got her a large house. It's too late to say otherwise now. I wasn't consulted in any of this decision. Either way, I can't accept it. You're always complaining. Enough. Calm down and think. I'll go back to my mother's for a while." My husband angrily slammed the door and left. Left alone in the room, tears streamed down my face. I couldn't understand why my husband decided everything on his own. It's unimaginable that he intends to give away the house I inherited from my father to my sister-in-law. Every day, my husband sent me messages asking if I had calmed down and to come back soon. Each time, I had to firmly tell him that I had no intention of agreeing. Then, one day, he said something shocking over the phone. "Hey, Emily, when will you come here and live with me? Stop nagging. I've said it so many times. I have no intention of living with Mary. Moving there and giving this house to Ellie. I've already told Ellie. Stop being selfish. She might be coming back this week, so there's no time. Why should I give up my house for your family? I inherited this house from my father. Don't decide on your own. Who do you think you're talking to? Even my mother is furious. I'm at my wit's end. That's not my problem. You're ignoring my feelings," I responded. My husband let out a big sigh over the phone, clearly frustrated. Then he said something shocking. "If you can't listen to me, then let's divorce. Hand over the house to Ellie. Leave by tomorrow." At that moment, my love for my husband quickly faded. Threatening me with the word divorce was utterly despicable. I couldn't possibly forgive him for using divorce as a threat without considering someone's feelings. I couldn't allow these people to have their way. Burning with anger, my husband continued to speak with a triumphant and dominating tone. "Listen, if you don't leave by tomorrow, I'll really divorce you. Got it?" "Wait, are you serious?" "Of course I am. You don't have a choice. What will you do if you, a housewife, get divorced? You can't survive. Enough, I get it. Good. Hurry up and move over here. My mother is looking forward to disciplining you." He hung up the phone with a confident tone, thinking I would do as he said. After that call, I made up my mind and decided to seek help from my father for a plan. The next day, everything was ready for the move. I replied calmly when asked, "By the way, I'm curious about when Ellie will be back." "She'll be back tomorrow. Why are you so obsessed with Ellie? Between you and me, she seems to have made a lot from stock investments." "I see. So if you provide her with a house, maybe you can ask for financial help." "That's so like you. Anyway, you need to leave that house by today. It's inconvenient for all of us. Don't worry, I've already moved." "What? What do you mean?" My husband seemed genuinely surprised. "I knew it. You don't want to divorce me, do you?" "Naturally. Without an income, you can't survive. But all of this is coming to an end. We're still married now, so that's why we're talking." "Wait, what? I can only think about divorce now." My husband was clearly shaken by my words. "You promised to move out of that house, right, and live with me. But you've already moved? What are you saying? Of course, I won't live in a house with a husband who decides everything on his own and a bullying mother-in-law. Why are you including me? You promised to move out for Ellie. I said I've already moved, didn't I? I did as you said. Enough with the jokes. Where are you now?" My husband's tone was panicky, and he was clearly losing his cool. "Actually, I'm at my parents' house." "Why?" "I moved to my parents' rural home. I don't plan on returning to where you guys are." "You should have told me that sooner." My husband replied with a hint of relief in his voice. "If I could just give that house to Ellie, it doesn't matter where you live. It would require $3,300,000. $3,300,000. I put the house." I put the house I inherited from my father up for sale. And if you truly want to give it to Ellie, buy it for $3,300 and then hand it over. Are you joking? I'm serious. The house was still in my father's name, so I asked him to sell it. In reality, what I asked my father for was to sell the house. My father had always said, "If something happens, contact me. You can live or sell this house as you like. I'll help you." As a result of the valuation, a price of $3,300,000 was proposed, which I gladly agreed to and put the house on the market immediately. My husband probably never saw this coming. He spat out insults, consumed with anger. "Why are you doing this without asking me? This is unforgivable. I'm not asking for, nor do I need your approval. We're getting divorced soon anyway. I don't care. Do you understand your position? You'll be the one in trouble if we divorce. Since you don't have an income, you're just a housewife. I'd rather struggle on my own than be with you forever. Listen, Ellie will be coming back soon. I told you I'm relying on Ellie's money, didn't I? So what? Like I said, if you want to let dear Ellie live in that house, just buy it for $3,300,000. That is if you can." "What? That's impossible. If Ellie has made a lot of money from her investments, I don't see why she can't afford it." "I don't know how much she made, but that's too much. She can never afford it." My husband was all excuses with no hint of an apology, maintaining his domineering attitude. I felt it was foolish to spend any more time on him and unleashed everything I wanted to say. "I'm done with you and this ridiculous mess. Did you think threatening divorce would make me give up the house? If you thought being a housewife meant I'd do whatever you say, you're so wrong. Hey, let's calm down and talk." "I am calm. Isn't it you who's panicking? I won't be controlled by you or your family anymore. Stay out of my life. Go to hell with your beloved mother, you mama's boy." I shouted loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear, then abruptly hung up the phone. Of course, I'd had enough of these insane calls from my husband, so I blocked his number. I immediately consulted my lawyer and decided to request a divorce. It took some time, but the divorce was finalized, recognizing my husband's fault. He and Mary still live in that apartment. As for Ellie, they couldn't provide the large house she wanted, and she was furious, claiming this wasn't the deal, and made a U-turn back overseas. My ex-husband's plan to seek financial assistance from his successful sister fell through, and now he seems to be struggling financially, having to pay me alimony and support his mother. As long as he continues to live with such a selfish mother, his life will never be prosperous. On the other hand, I've moved to the countryside and am enjoying peaceful days with my parents. I recently started a clerical job at a small company introduced by a neighbor. With that salary, I can live comfortably. I plan to live here for a while. I want to be by my parents' side as much as possible to repay the kindness they show me.
Megan, as usual, you're as inconsiderate as ever. This trip was something my son and I had been looking forward to for ages, and since you had no hand in planning it, you really have no business being here. My mother-in-law snapped the moment my husband stepped away from the table. We were on a vacation that I had organized at my husband's request, but her hostility made it clear I was an outsider. At that point, I figured leaving early was the best option. Whatever they talked about once I was gone was no longer my concern. I'm Megan, a working woman with the flexibility to do most of my job from home. This means I spend a lot of time in the house. And my husband, Frank, always seems to be focused on impressing others while acting like he's above it all. He loves throwing money around for show but somehow never contributes to our household bills. He hid this side of himself when we were dating, but it became painfully obvious once we started living together. His biggest supporter is, of course, his mother, who never misses a chance to praise him. I expected her to dote on him like many mothers do, but she turned out to be harsh and dismissive of everyone else's opinions, especially mine. From the start, she made it clear that I wasn't good enough for her son, and her snide comments never stopped. She seemed especially bothered by my financial independence and my ability to support myself. "You're still young. You should go work outside," she would often suggest, as if I weren't already working. No matter how many times I explained that I worked from home full-time, she refused to acknowledge it, dismissing my job as some part-time hobby. I'm sure she believes I just play games all day or neglect the housework. Frank knows full well what my work schedule looks like, but that hasn't stopped his mother from seeing me as a lazy, irresponsible wife. What's worse is that he never stands up for me. When she criticizes me in front of him, he just sits there in silence. I've asked him countless times to set the record straight, but he always says it's our issue to work out. He refuses to get involved, leaving me to handle the constant attacks alone. Once, when I pressed him for support, he angrily tossed divorce papers at me. The hurt and frustration were overwhelming, and for the first time, I seriously considered leaving him. But as difficult as marriage had been, the thought of divorce felt even more terrifying. I've come to realize that my husband constantly prioritizes his mother over our relationship, which is beyond frustrating. Still, I know I need to find a way to handle her expectations and comments without making things worse. I didn't agree to a divorce, not because my feelings for him remained intact, but because it seemed more practical to stay. He seems convinced I'm still head over heels in love with him, which only boosts his arrogant attitude. It's the kind of arrogance that's charming in a child but utterly repellent in an adult. Over time, I've learned to tune out his conceit and brush off his behavior. Another reason I hesitated to push for divorce was our living situation. Thanks to my husband's job, we live far from his parents, so we only see them once or twice a year. I thought I could manage with such limited interaction. Also, since I work with international clients, American holidays don't play a huge role in my schedule, giving me some flexibility. As for my husband, even though he has the opportunity, he rarely takes extended time off, so it's not like we spend a lot of time together anyway. Between that and the infrequent visits to his parents, I believed I could navigate this rocky situation. Then, after his first day back at work, he came home bursting with excitement, proposing a spontaneous overseas trip. He explained that some of his colleagues had gone on a 7-day international holiday, and he felt left out. He was proud of his spur-of-the-moment idea, oblivious to how impractical it all seemed, which left me stunned by his naivety. I hadn't traveled anywhere that year, but I suggested we stick to a domestic trip since he didn't even have a passport yet. I've always been good with languages, having studied abroad and traveled widely before we got married. Aside from English, I'm fluent in Spanish and have a decent command of Chinese. When my mom got hooked on Korean dramas, I even picked up a bit of Korean, though I'm still shaky on it. But regardless of my language skills, getting passports and planning an international trip isn't as simple as my husband imagined. I suggested we plan for something abroad during a more convenient season, like the summer or winter holidays. But he was insistent. Despite having zero travel experience, he picked the destination, took time off without confirming it with his workplace, and expected me to handle all the details. When I voiced concerns about the logistics of such a trip, he brushed them aside with, "English is universal." He was convinced we wouldn't face any problems, as if everything would magically fall into place. Just when I thought we might manage, my husband dropped another bombshell. His plan included bringing his mother along, and he simply assumed I would handle everything. Managing 2 inexperienced travelers was already daunting enough, but his casual remark about showing some respect for your elders and earning brownie points as a devoted wife felt patronizing and overwhelming. It wasn't framed as a favor I might do for them, it was more like a duty he expected me to fulfill. Still, despite my growing frustration, I found myself quietly making the necessary arrangements just as he had directed. In his mind, he was doing me a favor by orchestrating this trip, and it felt impossible to argue without seeming ungrateful. So, as he wished, I got to work. I handled everything, from securing passports for my mother-in-law and husband to booking flights, hotels, and planning a detailed itinerary. It was an enormous amount of effort, but I completed each task with precision, crafting what I knew would be a seamless travel experience. On the day of our departure, my mother-in-law, completely oblivious to all the work I had put in, was excited and chattered on about the luxury seating she assumed her son had arranged. She gushed over him, praising what she thought was his meticulous planning and generosity. Meanwhile, my husband basked in the compliments, shamelessly accepting credit for the trip's organization. Despite all my effort, I stood there in silence, realizing just how little recognition I would receive for the work I had done. It became painfully clear at the airport just how much of the heavy lifting I had done. Both my husband and his mother were completely clueless about navigating the terminals and spent their time wandering aimlessly while I handled all the logistics. When it was time to board, they were still off somewhere, completely unaware. In a frantic rush to locate them, I had to ask the airport staff to make a gate announcement. Their disorganization, combined with their complete lack of appreciation, was both frustrating and embarrassing. To make things worse, they accused me of trying to secure a more comfortable flight for myself, even though they spent most of the journey pestering the flight attendants with endless requests. Once we arrived at our destination, I was hoping for some peace at the hotel after the chaos of immigration, but that hope quickly vanished. Suddenly, my husband claimed to be sick and rushed off to the bathroom, leaving me to manage all our luggage. It was confusing, especially since we had eaten the same meal. But maybe it was a little karma for his behavior on the flight. He'd spent most of it flirting with one of the attendants. As I struggled with our bags, my mother-in-law wasted no time in berating me. She accused me of being a selfish daughter-in-law, claiming that the trip was meant to be a special getaway just for her and her son, and implied that I had merely tagged along for a free ride. She even went so far as to criticize my job, suggesting I didn't really contribute anything financially. Her comments stung, especially considering the enormous effort I had put into making this trip happen in the first place. It was almost laughable when she said I didn't deserve to enjoy myself because I hadn't contributed to the planning. Then she added, "I'm not sure if I'll even enjoy this trip with you here." That was the last straw. "Fine, then I'll leave," I said calmly, without a second thought. I handed her my husband's suitcase, kept my smaller bag, and walked away. Her stunned expression was almost comical, as if she hadn't just told me to go. As I walked off, I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. It became painfully clear at the airport just how much of the heavy lifting I had done. Both my husband and his mother were completely clueless about navigating the terminals and spent their time wandering aimlessly while I handled all the logistics. When it was time to board, they were still off somewhere, completely unaware. In a frantic rush to locate them, I had to ask the airport staff to make a gate announcement. Their disorganization, combined with their complete lack of appreciation, was both frustrating and embarrassing. To make things worse, they accused me of trying to secure a more comfortable flight for myself, even though they spent most of the journey pestering the flight attendants with endless requests. Once we arrived at our destination, I was hoping for some peace at the hotel after the chaos of immigration, but that hope quickly vanished. Suddenly, my husband claimed to be sick and rushed off to the bathroom, leaving me to manage all our luggage. It was confusing, especially since we had eaten the same meal. But maybe it was a little karma for his behavior on the flight. He'd spent most of it flirting with one of the attendants. As I struggled with our bags, my mother-in-law wasted no time in berating me. She accused me of being a selfish daughter-in-law, claiming that the trip was meant to be a special getaway just for her and her son, and implied that I had merely tagged along for a free ride. She even went so far as to criticize my job, suggesting I didn't really contribute anything financially. Her comments stung, especially considering the enormous effort I had put into making this trip happen in the first place. It was almost laughable when she said I didn't deserve to enjoy myself because I hadn't contributed to the planning. Then she added, "I'm not sure if I'll even enjoy this trip with you here." That was the last straw. "Fine, then I'll leave," I said calmly, without a second thought. I handed her my husband's suitcase, kept my smaller bag, and walked away. Her stunned expression was almost comical, as if she hadn't just told me to go. As I walked off, I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. It became painfully clear at the airport just how much of the heavy lifting I had done. Both my husband and his mother were completely clueless about navigating the terminals and spent their time wandering aimlessly while I handled all the logistics. When it was time to board, they were still off somewhere, completely unaware. In a frantic rush to locate them, I had to ask the airport staff to make a gate announcement. Their disorganization, combined with their complete lack of appreciation, was both frustrating and embarrassing. To make things worse, they accused me of trying to secure a more comfortable flight for myself, even though they spent most of the journey pestering the flight attendants with endless requests. Once we arrived at our destination, I was hoping for some peace at the hotel after the chaos of immigration, but that hope quickly vanished. Suddenly, my husband claimed to be sick and rushed off to the bathroom, leaving me to manage all our luggage. It was confusing, especially since we had eaten the same meal, but maybe it was a little karma for his behavior on the flight. He'd spent most of it flirting with one of the attendants. As I struggled with our bags, my mother-in-law wasted no time in berating me. She accused me of being a selfish daughter-in-law, claiming that the trip was meant to be a special getaway just for her and her son, and implied that I had merely tagged along for a free ride. She even went so far as to criticize my job, suggesting I didn't really contribute anything financially. Her comments stung, especially considering the enormous effort I had put into making this trip happen in the first place. It was almost laughable when she said I didn't deserve to enjoy myself because I hadn't contributed to the planning. Then she added, "I'm not sure if I'll even enjoy this trip with you here." That was the last straw. "Fine, then I'll leave," I said calmly, without a second thought. I handed her my husband's suitcase, kept my smaller bag, and walked away. Her stunned expression was almost comical, as if she hadn't just told me to go. As I walked off, I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. "If you cause any more trouble or contact me again, I'll have no choice but to inform your company about your escapades. Being rejected by the dancer you admire would certainly be a blow to your ego," I warned. Frank, who had been aggressive up until then, responded with a subdued okay before hanging up. A few days later, I received a call from my ex-father-in-law. He revealed that he had divorced my ex-mother-in-law, which struck me as odd since we were no longer family. However, he felt compelled to share his findings about her true character. He had grown suspicious of her spending habits and discovered that she had drained his retirement savings on beauty treatments and cosmetic procedures. I was unfamiliar with these details and couldn't offer much insight, as I hadn't observed any noticeable changes in her. Perhaps the infrequency of our meetings had made any transformations less apparent to me. I even questioned my ex-father-in-law if he was sure the money was being used for beauty treatments. "She's spent a lot, but I don't see any visible changes. Maybe they're minor, only noticeable to her," I speculated. It seemed like a frivolous waste of money, leaving nothing behind. Naturally, my ex-mother-in-law turned to her son Frank for support. Since our divorce, Frank's financial situation has deteriorated. He's now drowning in debt and lost his apartment due to unpaid rent, forcing him and his mother to live in a rundown apartment. Despite their dire circumstances, his mother refuses to work and continues spending on beauty treatments, while Frank struggles to juggle his debts and cover their living expenses. From what I've heard, maintaining appearances remains their priority, even as their quality of life declines. Ironically, the beauty treatments have become less effective, and she now appears much older. As for me, I cherish the peace and freedom that comes with focusing on my work without interference. It's a refreshing reminder of the importance of living within one's means.
Oh, Mom, when I came back from shopping, I saw my daughter Madison crouched at the entrance with a big belly. She looked really tired and her face was thin and pale. Her eyes were a bit unfocused as she looked up at me. Next to her, a little child was holding on tightly to Madison, calling Mom, Mom. I realized this child was my granddaughter, Harper. I brought them both inside and asked what happened. Madison told me that her husband, Stephen, got frustrated because she couldn't move around much during her second pregnancy and had left them in front of the house. Madison was clearly in her last month of pregnancy and needed care. Even though the days were sunny and warm, the wind was cold. I felt so angry, wondering what Stephen would have done if I hadn't been there. I didn't think he was the kind of person to do something like this. Pregnancy isn't an illness, right? We have pregnant women at my work who do their jobs from home just fine. And Harper, she's always crying and so loud. My colleagues' kids never cry like that. When I finally called Stephen, he sighed loudly on purpose. An unemployed, obese woman and a noisy child are a nuisance. Let her parents take care of them for a while. Realizing it was pointless to talk to him, I decided to focus on caring for Madison and Harper instead. Half a year later, on a spring afternoon, Stephen called. "Hey, what's going on? Your house is gone." At first, I was confused, but then I understood. "You finally noticed," I replied. After hearing the truth, he was speechless and turned pale. My name is Scarlett. I'm a 58-year-old housewife. My husband passed away about 3 years ago, leaving me alone, but I don't mind being alone. His study is filled with books, including his favorite novels, challenging research papers, magazine clippings, and diaries. Being in the study makes me feel close to him. Sometimes I spend time there, looking through the books. My daughter Madison, her daughter Harper, and Madison's husband Stephen live about a 30-minute drive away in the next town. Stephen works at a big company owned by his dad. At just 33, he's already a department head and is even considered a potential future CEO. Madison and Stephen met at a beer party when Madison was out with friends. One of her friends recognized an old classmate, who turned out to be Stephen. They discovered they worked near each other and started seeing each other more often, either by bumping into one another or going out for drinks with friends. Eventually, this led to a relationship. Madison wasn't the type to make the first move and often called me, unsure of what to do. I wasn't very experienced in love either, so I tell her, "Well, I'm not sure either, but maybe just go out for a meal and enjoy yourselves." Unlike me, my husband had experienced many romances before we met. But when it came to our daughter's love life, we both agreed on one thing: she shouldn't date someone strange. My husband, always protective, even joked about calling himself strange. Their relationship continued smoothly, and within a year, they happily announced their engagement. Stephen, with his strong position in his father's company and his impressive sales skills, had earned my husband's trust enough for us to feel comfortable entrusting our daughter to him. Reflecting on this, my husband reassured me, saying, "I also felt at ease sending our daughter off to such a respectable person." Shortly after, Madison and Stephen married and moved to the next town to begin their life together. Initially, Madison would visit us often, sharing the excitement of her pregnancy and her worries about childbirth. About 3 or 4 months after Madison shared her pregnancy news, my husband tragically passed away. He was involved in a car accident caused by a truck driver who had fallen asleep at the wheel. Both Madison and I were deeply shaken by the sudden loss. We struggled to maintain our composure as we rushed to arrange the funeral and handle the necessary company and government procedures. The days passed quickly, and before we knew it, a month had already gone by. It's strange that I hadn't seen Stephen much since he first came to introduce himself before the wedding. Even at the funeral, he only stayed for about an hour before leaving abruptly. I found it a bit rude, but Madison explained, "That's just how he is. Stephen is always busy with work," she said with a forced smile tinged with sadness. It seemed like she didn't get much chance to talk or spend time with Stephen, who often left early for golf meetings on weekends. Being the son of a company president might excuse his absence somewhat, but I wished he would consider Madison, especially since she was heavily pregnant. As summer drew to a close, Madison returned to our home to give birth. With her belly fully rounded, she was eagerly anticipating meeting her baby. "It's a girl. We've already picked a name," she told me. "Oh, really? What's her name?" I asked. "Harper. Stephen and I chose it," Madison replied, smiling warmly. She gave birth within 2 weeks and soon returned home where Stephen was waiting. Madison, make sure to visit us sometimes. Bring Harper too, I urged her. I called Madison again, hoping to reconnect, but her response sounded hesitant. Yeah, maybe once things settle down I'll come over, she replied. Despite my concerns, I hoped it was just a temporary situation. Madison was always busy with childcare and housework, and Stephen, who should have been dependable, often came home late or not until the morning. I wondered aloud, even if he's the president's son, can his job really be that demanding? Despite several attempts to reach out, the pattern remained unchanged. It had been 3 years since Harper was born, yet I had only seen my granddaughter once, right after Madison gave birth. I wanted to support Madison and had expressed this to her many times over the phone, but her responses were always evasive. Before a long weekend, I decided to call Madison again. Hello, Madison. How have you been? I was thinking of visiting you and Harper soon. I knew I had to be careful not to push too hard. Conversations with friends in the neighborhood had taught me that it's becoming less common for grandparents to see their grandchildren regularly, and pushing too much could strain the relationship further. Madison was my daughter, but I feared this call might lead to rejection, forcing me to accept the situation. With these thoughts, I waited anxiously for Madison's response. Mom, I haven't been feeling well lately and I need some space. Please don't call me for a while, Madison said over the phone. Are you okay? If you're not feeling well, I'm really worried. Can I bring over some food? I asked, concerned. I don't need it. Can we stop this? I'm going to hang up, Madison replied, sounding frustrated. Wait, how about Harper and Stephen? Is he doing well? Has he caught a cold? I pressed, trying to keep the conversation going. You're being too nosy, Mom. I want to raise my child on my own, so please stop calling, Madison snapped before hanging up abruptly. Feeling hurt and confused, I paused, unsure of what to do next. The brief call left me deeply shaken. I never expected Madison to feel that way about me. I thought I was showing kindness, but now I realized I had been meddling, and it pained me as I stared at the silent phone. Perhaps she was exhausted and stressed from childcare, or maybe I had crossed a line by interfering too much. Considering different possibilities, I acknowledged there might have been fault on my part and decided to stop calling. Still, I couldn't shake the thought. Had my once open and communicative daughter changed so drastically? Despite my reluctance to give up on seeing my granddaughter, I continued to call about once a month. Each time, I faced a distant reception and was denied access to Harper. Hey, are you feeling all right? I'd ask, only to receive no reply or have the call abruptly end. Hoping to get a better sense of what was happening, I decided to call Stephen. He was my daughter's husband, and I figured he might have some insight into Madison's and Harper's situation. Stephen never answered the phone promptly, but late one night, he returned my call. Madison? Oh yes, she's fine, Stephen assured me. She's doing a great job looking after Harper. You don't need to worry. Madison has always been very responsible. That's good to hear. Could you let her know I'd like to see her sometime? I asked, hopefully. Yes, of course, Stephen replied. It's odd that Madison isn't picking up her phone lately. That's not like her. It's quite concerning, I added, feeling uneasy about Stephen's responses. His words felt rehearsed, as if he was trying to downplay the situation. About a month later, as autumn set in and I returned home from shopping one day, I spotted a figure sitting on my front porch. At first, I thought it might be a homeless person who had mistaken my house for somewhere else. But as I approached, I realized it was Madison. Madison. And look at that belly. And who is this child? I exclaimed in surprise as I saw Madison's noticeably larger belly, indicating she was pregnant again. Oh, Mom. Madison's face was tired and drawn, her eyes unfocused. The child next to her clung tightly, calling out, Mom, Mom. I realized it was Harper. I quickly unlocked the door and ushered them inside, practically carrying them to the living room sofa. I made some hot milk for them to drink. Harper cautiously sipped the warm milk. It's cooled down now, so it's safe, I reassured her. Harper drank, leaving a white ring around her mouth. Turning to Madison, I started asking questions. What happened? Why were you sitting outside like that? Where's Stephen? What's going on with your home? Madison began to cry and looked down for a while before speaking. Take your time, I comforted her, rubbing her back gently. After a moment, she explained that as her second pregnancy progressed, she found it increasingly difficult to manage household chores and take care of Harper, which frustrated Stephen. He had driven them to the front of my house and left them there. Seeing Madison heavily pregnant and upset made me furious, imagining what could have happened if I hadn't been home. I immediately called Stephen. He hadn't mentioned anything about Madison's pregnancy during our last conversation, which would have prompted me to offer help sooner. After several rings, he answered with a tired voice. Hello, Stephen. What's this I hear about you leaving Madison and Harper outside my house just now? I asked, my tone filled with anger and concern. Stephen replied casually, well, that's how it is. Madison hasn't been keeping up with household duties lately, using her pregnancy as an excuse. Even when I come home tired, there's no dinner ready. I was taken aback by his nonchalant response, feeling a mix of disbelief and disappointment. Not helping because you think it's all Madison's job. Don't you think you should be supporting your wife? I challenged Stephen, my voice tinged with disbelief. Why should I help? Household chores are Madison's responsibility. She's the housewife, Stephen replied dismissively. I have my own work to focus on. It's only natural she takes care of the house. Madison is pregnant, Stephen. It's not fair to expect her to manage everything alone without any appreciation from you, I countered, trying to reason with him. Pregnancy isn't an illness. Many pregnant women work remotely just fine at our company. And as for Harper, all kids have their moments. Comparing her to someone else's child isn't fair. Stephen sighed dramatically over the phone. An overweight wife and noisy kids are a hassle. Let the parents deal with them for a while. At that moment I realized it was pointless to continue the conversation. Fine by me, I said firmly, hanging up. Stephen's mocking laughter lingered in my ears before the call ended. Suppressing my anger and frustration, I focused on what truly mattered, taking care of Madison and Harper. Harper's clothes were stained with food and juice spills, turning into little spots. Her hair also had a faint smell, so my first priority was giving her a bath. The spare clothes in the carry case were slightly dirty too. We'll need to go shopping for new clothes tomorrow with Grandma, I told her gently. 3-year-old Harper was chatty, talking nonstop about her favorite foods, picture books, and characters from her favorite kids' show. Meanwhile, Madison looked exhausted and worn out from the strain of managing everything on her own. She could barely move from the couch. Quickly, I prepared fresh sheets and set up a bed in an empty room upstairs for Madison to rest. She looked worn out, with rough skin and disheveled hair, which made her look quite pitiful. Call me if you need anything at all. I'll take care of Harper, so you just focus on resting, okay? I assured Madison. She nodded gratefully and soon fell asleep, finally able to relax. The next 1 to 2 weeks were spent nursing Madison back to health and caring for Harper. Spending time with my granddaughter, whom I hadn't seen much until then, was incredibly fulfilling and not at all burdensome. It was difficult for me to resist when Harper would plead, "Please buy it," with that sweet voice of hers. As Madison gradually recovered, she began to open up about her past. Stephen used to be kind before we got married. He respected my opinions and we would discuss everything together. Those were the happiest times. Her voice grew somber. But after we married, he changed. He started giving orders, saying things like, "You can't rely on your parents. You have to manage all the housework perfectly." I just accepted it all. She shared that she was allowed to come back to her parents' house when Harper was born. Looking back, it felt like I was being manipulated, controlled. He even told me once that I shouldn't rely on you, Mom. So is that why you hung up quickly when I called? Yes, calls with you were forbidden too, so I had to hang up quickly. I'm really sorry, Madison explained with a mixture of regret and sadness. Later that night, after Harper had fallen asleep, we sat down with ginger tea and talked. I felt a rush of emotions, anger and sorrow mingling together. Stephen, who had once seemed so respectful when he asked for Madison's hand in marriage, now caused her so much pain and even spoke ill of her as if she were a burden. What's more, there were suspicions of him having an affair. I've noticed perfume on him lately. It's not like him, especially not a woman's scent. And his shirts have had a sweet smell when I've done the laundry, I shared with Madison. His late nights and early mornings suddenly seemed to make sense. Madison, you've been incredibly strong through all of this, managing the house and taking care of Harper, all while dealing with your husband's infidelity, I praised her, overwhelmed with admiration for her resilience despite everything. Despite any disagreements, she's my daughter and family. Madison teared up quietly. The gentle autumn weather persisted, dry yet refreshing compared to summer. Madison's due date was approaching. I focused on pampering both Madison and Harper, nurturing their emotional and physical well-being. 6 months passed and spring arrived. While I was preparing lunch one day, my phone rang unexpectedly. I paused to answer it. The caller was Stephen. Yes, this is Scarlett, I answered cautiously. Hey, what's going on? Your house is gone. Stephen's voice sounded bewildered on the other end of the line. Finally noticed, have you? I replied, a hint of amusement in my voice. Stephen had arrived to pick up Madison, Harper, and the newborn only to find the house demolished and an empty lot with a for sale sign. The move and demolition had been completed a month ago, and Stephen seemed to have just realized the situation, prompting his panicked call to me. We've moved. You left Madison, Harper, and the baby in my care for half a year. Have you been aware of that? I questioned pointedly. Yeah, I've come to pick them up now. Where are you? Stephen asked urgently. Come to pick them up? Unfortunately, we've relocated to a secure apartment. There's no point in telling you where. I'm not considering returning them to you, I responded firmly. Don't joke with me. I told my parents I'd bring Harper and the baby over. Give me back the kids at least, Stephen insisted, his tone unsettling as he referred to the children almost as possessions. That's a promise you made on your own. It doesn't concern us, so we won't comply. I'm busy now, so if you don't mind. Just then, the baby started crying, the sound audible through the phone. Stephen seemed to react softly, saying, "Oh." Ignoring him, I hung up and hurried to change the baby's diaper in the next room. I could hear Madison's phone conversation faintly. "Yes, hello, what?" Her voice carried a hint of frustration, likely arguing with Stephen. Soon after, Harper emerged from her room, looking scared. "Mom is angry," she whispered anxiously. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything will be fine," I assured her, pulling her into a comforting hug. About 10 minutes later, the commotion quieted down, and Madison joined us. It was Stephen. He was demanding our new address, but I refused outright. "I don't care if he wants to show Harper and the baby to his parents," she sighed, reflecting on his persistence. But maybe it was for the best he called. I finally got to say what I've been wanting to. Regarding the lawyer, the issue at hand was Stephen's infidelity. During that call, I informed him that we would proceed with a divorce through a lawyer, and I would also seek alimony due to his affair. I also sent proof of his infidelity to his father, Madison recounted calmly. Over the past 6 months, we had hired a detective to investigate Stephen's behavior, and the evidence confirmed his unfaithfulness. With 2 young children to consider, Madison couldn't overlook this betrayal. Stephen was caught off guard by Madison's knowledge of his affair and was visibly shaken. He must have been pale with shock when he realized his parents were aware of the evidence. Outraged, he exclaimed, "How could you do this?" "But those were my terms," I replied firmly. Given his parents' strict nature, I anticipated they would not take his actions lightly. Madison's prediction proved correct. A meeting was arranged with Stephen's parents to discuss his conduct. During the meeting, they apologized to Madison and accepted the divorce proceedings. Stephen's father, despite his son being a potential future company president, expressed his anger and disappointment, stating that a man who cheats on his wife and neglects his children is unworthy of such responsibilities. As a result, he dismissed Stephen from his position within the company. In the end, Stephen faced serious consequences. He lost his position and gave up custody of his children, allowing Madison and me to raise them. He was required to pay compensation and child support, but struggled due to debts accrued from supporting his affair partner. Although he found another job, the salary was modest, forcing him to move into a small, inexpensive apartment. After losing his shot at becoming president, Stephen's affair partner callously abandoned him. It became clear she was more interested in his title than him as a person. Despite multiple attempts to reconnect and reconcile, Madison cut off contact with Stephen, and their divorce was finalized smoothly. Madison became a single parent, but found strength in raising her children who thrived under her care. Despite the rift, Stephen's father, feeling remorseful, continued to support Harper and her sibling beyond the agreed child support. Despite Madison and my initial refusals, he insisted, and we accepted it for the children's future. We also kept Stephen's parents updated with photos and videos of their grandchildren, and occasionally video called when schedules allowed. Seeing Harper and her sibling grow up brought joy to Stephen's parents, who cherished their role as grandparents deeply. Harper's days at preschool were filled with joy, especially with her mud and sand playtime with friends. One sunny afternoon, I arrived to pick her up and noticed she was clutching a rolled-up piece of drawing paper. "What's that, Harper?" I asked, curiously. She hesitated shyly before replying, "It's a picture of Mom." The preschool teacher had assigned them to draw portraits as gifts for their mothers that day. Although Harper was too bashful to show me the drawing right away, she eagerly rushed home and presented it to Madison. While I couldn't see the portrait myself, Madison was deeply moved and praised Harper's thoughtfulness. It was a touching moment that showcased Harper's growing individuality. Thinking about her future fills me with hope and excitement. Living together as a family of 4, experiencing this happiness, feels like nothing short of a miracle.
My mom's cooking is way better than yours. While some leaned back on the dining chairs and others sat up straight, the 4 of us gathered around a table full of delicious dishes. Normally, we wouldn't have such a fancy meal, but today we were eating with my in-laws. Keith, smirking even while eating, looked at me and said, "But I made that dish. Your usual bad cook." I responded to Keith's comment and then glanced at my parents-in-law to see their reactions. What did you say? My parents-in-law looked confused. The atmosphere grew tense. For a moment, it felt like time stopped, and everyone just sat there, unable to move or speak, with their forks in their hands. I thought it was time to stop hiding my feelings. I didn't want to keep up my relationships with Keith and his parents while secretly feeling so unhappy. I was ready to fight back. I had planned my revenge on Keith for a long time, and today was the day. That's why I left our daughter, Naomi, with my parents. I didn't want her to see this ugly side of things or get upset by the conversation. I was determined to reach my goal and felt secretly pleased about it. My name is Rachel Davis. I'm 34 years old, and my daughter, Naomi, just started elementary school. I'm a typical housewife, living a comfortable life. Even though I call myself typical, I married into a wealthy family so I can enjoy some luxury. However, I wasn't overly greedy. All I wanted was to be happy with my husband, Keith. Most people would think we have a happy life, but there was one thing that troubled me. Keith, who is 39 this year, had been coming home late more often recently. He's always had late nights since we got married because he works at a big company and has a lot of responsibilities. I figured his job kept him busy, so I didn't complain. Plus, on his days off, Keith would spend time with Naomi and sometimes take us on family trips. Keith had never complained since we got married. Even though he often felt stress from work, he always tried his best. I thought it wouldn't be fair to suspect him of something like infidelity. In many families, stress and complaints can lead to arguments, but that wasn't the case for us. Keith didn't have bad habits like drinking too much or being mean. He was quite respectable. Sometimes I admired him, thinking that people from good families tend to have good manners. However, something changed this year. Sometimes he would respond to me in a distant way, even when I talked about ordinary things. Recently, he started spending more time on his smartphone, and our conversations became less frequent. I thought it might be due to work, so I didn't question him about it. One weekday evening, our daughter Naomi came home from elementary school and said, "Daddy was with someone I don't know." Upon hearing Naomi's statement, I stopped slicing vegetables in the kitchen. "What do you mean?" I hadn't planned on asking Naomi about such things, but with Keith's recent strange behavior, doubts had started creeping in. I was curious, so I gently probed for more information from Naomi. "What did this person look like? Was it a woman?" "I don't know," Naomi replied. "Okay, how old did she seem to be?" "Probably around your age, Mom." "All right, thanks." With that limited information, I couldn't be sure if Keith was cheating. Given his high position, it could have been work-related, but something felt off. Troubled by this uneasy feeling, I decided to go somewhere specific the next day. "I'm sorry for bringing this up suddenly," I apologized. "No, it's okay. I understand the situation with your husband now. What exactly would you like me to look into?" Timothy asked. Lost in my thoughts while sitting on the couch, I watched as Timothy spread out some documents on the glass table in front of me. "We have a plan where we can take photos for evidence or have our staff interact closely with your husband to gather information, and then," Timothy explained the details carefully. "I think I'd like to go with this option," I said, pointing to the plan outlined in the documents, nodding in agreement. "I'm currently in the city, having visited a detective agency located in a back alley not far from downtown. Across from me sits Timothy Rogers, dressed in a black suit, the detective assigned to my case. Since yesterday, I've been plagued by a persistent suspicion that Keith might be cheating on me. Reluctantly, I turned to a professional detective. Dumping my husband, with whom I've shared my life for several years, wasn't something I could easily discuss with anyone else. Yet the need to uncover the truth outweighed my reservations, and I recounted the events leading up to our meeting. "So, what kind of work does your husband usually do?" Timothy inquired. "He's in a managerial role in sales at a major corporation. Like a department head or something?" "Yes, something along those lines. But right now, I prefer not to disclose the company's name. Is that all right? I wanted to keep things low-key and avoid involving people who weren't directly connected to what was happening between Keith and me." "I understand. Depending on how things progress, we may need that information, but for now," Timothy paused to clarify. "Just to confirm, does your husband typically work at the company's main office or at a sales branch?" "I believe it's the sales branch," I replied, trying to recall. "Got it. If he's based at the company, knowing the name would help. I can tell you, but only if you promise not to share it with anyone." Timothy looked a bit nervous as he handed me a pen, and I quickly wrote down the name on the notepad he had placed on the table. This company is pretty big, or rather well known. Yes, exactly. That's why I didn't want to mention it. Can you please keep it confidential? Absolutely. We don't want to cause any trouble for the company. This is strictly about your personal situation. Timothy nodded solemnly, took a deep breath, and continued our discussion. 2 weeks passed since then. I returned to the detective agency and met with Timothy again. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but your husband is indeed cheating. Oh, I see. I widened my eyes in surprise, and at the same time, I sighed as if resigning myself to the truth. I was hurting inside. What had been a small suspicion had now become a painful reality, yet I felt a sense of duty to face it. It was this mix of emotions that kept me outwardly composed. What's the next step? Should we continue the investigation further? Yes, please. That would mean getting more deeply involved. Are you sure about that? Timothy asked cautiously. Yes, I replied firmly. Even though my heart felt heavy, I was determined to uncover the truth, so I nodded slowly. So the affair is confirmed now? I asked, needing confirmation. Yes, unfortunately. There were times when your husband was living with the woman he had the affair with, Timothy replied somberly. I see. So those times he didn't come home late because of work, but to be with his mistress. Knowing this made anger surge within me, I admitted bitterly. Do you want to see the photographic evidence now, or would you prefer to see it later? You can also choose not to see it, Timothy offered carefully. Show it to me, I said firmly, despite the turmoil inside me. Are you sure? He asked, concerned. Yes, please show it to me, I replied with a trembling voice. Timothy retrieved a photo from a brown envelope and handed it to me. As I looked at it, I saw Keith entering his mistress's house. Naomi hadn't been mistaken. The woman appeared to be around my age, but slightly younger and attractive. Keith seemed happier with her than with me. Naomi was only in first grade, and the thought of divorce pained me, but I couldn't bear to stay with a cheating husband. If this affair harmed Naomi in any way, I knew I had to act now. I looked at the photo again, suppressing my hurt, and made my decision. I need as much information as possible, I said firmly. All right then, we'll conduct an investigation over the next 2 months. Is that acceptable to you? Timothy asked. Yes, I have the funds for it. Please proceed, I replied, meeting Timothy's gaze. Hey, don't be saying such things. All you're doing is lying, came a voice. No, it's the truth. I am now at Keith's parents' house with Naomi not present, allowing me to respond fully to Keith's statements. I have not lied or deceived my parents-in-law. What's wrong with telling the truth? And there's no benefit for me in lying, I assert. A few days ago, Timothy completed his investigation and handed me a report, which I now have in a bag beside me. With this evidence, Keith won't be able to deny his actions, and once it's presented, his parents should understand. However, I need to approach this carefully, knowing Keith is capable of deceiving even those closest to him. I plan to reveal the truth to his parents while carefully observing the situation. You're crazy. My son would never cheat. You're just making up lies like Keith said. It's rude to accuse him falsely, Robert's voice boomed from inside the room. Moments ago, we were all chatting pleasantly, but a small disagreement between Keith and me had quickly turned the atmosphere tense. I had simply mentioned that Keith had been coming home late for the past 6 months, but he immediately became defensive and accused me of lying. I knew I had provoked this, but my resentment towards him ran deep. I had come to this gathering with a sense of needing to confront him. Keith said you can't even handle basic household chores properly. You're just sitting at home, doing nothing, Robert continued, his voice sharp. That's a misunderstanding, I replied firmly. A misunderstanding? Are you calling my son a liar? Yes, I affirmed, keeping my composure despite Robert's intimidating stare. That's absurd. My son is exceptional. I've given him the best education and upbringing. I taught him respect and responsibility. He wouldn't do something like cheat, Robert insisted adamantly. Robert's refusal to accept Keith's actions stemmed from his ignorance of the truth. His demeanor grew more tense by the moment. I was poised to present the evidence and reached for my bag. I used to trust you, but not anymore after this, Susan interjected with disappointment in her voice. Susan had always been kind. When I arrived early at their home today, she greeted me warmly. It was Susan who had initially encouraged Keith to marry me, owing to our mother's long-standing friendship. Yet now, Susan regarded me with suspicion, as if I were a criminal. If things are this bad, we might have to consider divorce, Susan sighed, her words heavy with resignation. I hadn't wanted divorce to be mentioned. Our family runs a prominent company. If people find out that someone like you is married to my son, especially since Keith is set to become CEO in about 10 years, it will reflect poorly on us. Susan continued, her tone direct but her expression apologetic. Plus, she can't even cook properly and is cheating. That's not true. I cook just fine. I defended myself. Really? Your cooking tastes awful, Susan retorted. In that room, where tension hung thick, Keith casually picked up his fork, took a piece of grilled fish from the table, and started eating. His arrogant demeanor grated on my nerves. You know, Mom's cooking is way better than yours, Keith remarked with a laugh. What? That was made by me though, wasn't it? Your usual mistress whose cooking is awful, I muttered in stunned disbelief at Keith's remark. The atmosphere in the room turned tense instantly. Excuse me. Both sets of parents-in-law looked shocked, mouths hanging open. Keith's eyes widened as he dropped the grilled fish he had picked up with his fork onto the table. What are you saying? Susan's voice quivered with surprise. Just what I said, I replied calmly to Susan's question. As I've been saying, the one lying here is my husband. Stop making up stories. Keith slammed his fork down, his voice rising. It's not true. Besides, I cooked that grilled fish this morning when I arrived, not your mother. You and your father wouldn't know since you came later in the afternoon, I explained, maintaining my composure. Keith's irritation grew, and his face flushed red with anger. You have evidence? Keith challenged, standing up from his seat. Yes, I do. I'll show you, I asserted firmly. What? No, you're lying. This is nonsense. Keith protested vehemently. It's true. I'm serious, I asserted firmly, meeting Keith's eyes with an unusually serious expression. Well, anyway, I haven't done anything wrong, Keith muttered, sitting back down quietly. You understand the consequences if this turns out to be true, right? Robert's voice rang out angrily. Let's calm down first. Does Rachel really have evidence? Susan interjected, trying to diffuse the escalating tension. In that moment, Susan was the voice of reason. I retrieved an envelope from my bag and placed photos, along with a letter-sized paper from Timothy, the detective, on the table. Keith's face paled as he watched me lay out the evidence. No, this isn't what it looks like, Keith protested desperately, refusing to face the truth. What's going on? What does all of this mean? Robert demanded, but Keith covered his ears in a futile attempt to block out the truth. What are these? These photos? Who is this person? Are you really cheating? Robert demanded, shocked and dismayed. Yes, that's correct. That's why I had these photos taken as evidence. This is not fabricated. I've also spoken with a lawyer, so if we decide to divorce, it will be handled legally, I stated firmly, my resolve unwavering. I was determined to hold Keith accountable. This could damage the reputation of my company. Robert's voice wavered. The confidence he had shown earlier seemed to fade away. What's the truth here? This isn't my fault, Keith muttered defensively. At Susan's question, Keith covered his face with both hands, unwilling to confront the reality before him. However, he couldn't deny the undeniable evidence any longer. Keith's distressed expression slowly gave way, and it became clear he was starting to regain his composure. All right, I'll talk, Keith slumped, appearing exhausted. He struggled to find the right words. I did cheat, but it's not entirely my fault. Keith began to justify himself from the beginning. I had someone I loved before, Keith admitted. Loved. I was taken aback. Keith had never mentioned this before. Since when? I pressed. Before I met you, before Mom introduced you to me, Keith confessed. So why did you choose to marry me then? I asked, feeling a mix of hurt and confusion. Because it looked good socially, Keith admitted reluctantly. Then he turned to his parents, his expression troubled. What do you mean by that? I asked, trying to comprehend Keith's explanation. Dad wanted me to get married soon, so I was set up with someone Mom recommended, Keith explained, his voice strained. So if you love someone else, why didn't you tell me? I questioned, feeling hurt and betrayed. Because I knew you would criticize me, Keith admitted reluctantly. Who is this person you love? Robert demanded angrily. The suspicion he had harbored towards me now shifted to Keith, and he banged the table with his right hand, demanding the full story. It was someone I met about 10 years ago. She worked at a nightlife spot, but given that my father runs a major company, I couldn't openly discuss it, Keith confessed, his tone resigned. A nightlife spot? Well, in that case, I probably would have opposed the marriage, Robert muttered with frustration and disappointment. Indeed, Keith admitted. Yes, Dad, so it's not entirely my fault. In truth, I wanted to marry her. Keith dropped a bombshell, revealing the truth I had never known. I was left speechless. We had lived together for years, had a child together, but Keith had never truly loved me. It was a devastating realization. She said it would be okay if we got married this year, so I saw it as my chance, Keith continued, explaining himself. Chance? Chance for what? What are you talking about? Susan, who had been listening intently, interjected with confusion. It was my last opportunity to marry her, and I thought if I spoke poorly of Rachel, Dad and Mom would agree to our divorce, Keith confessed bitterly. I'm tired of all of it, the societal pressures and expectations. I just want a simple life. I'd rather spend my life with that woman than with our family. Keith spoke with a raw honesty I had never heard from him before. Despite my hurt, I felt a twinge of sympathy, realizing the stress he had been under all these years. But it also became clear that our relationship had only been a facade, lacking any genuine love. So, what are you going to do about our marriage? I asked, my voice trembling. I'm going to get a divorce, Keith replied, his decision final. Do you have any idea how much money I've spent on you? Robert's anger escalated, his frustration palpable. Hey, please stop, I interjected, trying to ease the tension. What, you're siding with him now? Robert snapped back, his anger directed towards me. It's not about taking sides. We've never heard his true feelings before. He's always followed our advice and done what was expected, even since his college days, I explained, hoping to bring some perspective. And what about my business? I won't accept it unless he marries someone suitable, Robert continued, his fury unabated. I'm sorry, Keith's voice trembled with pain. Just saying sorry won't fix this, Robert retorted harshly. But isn't it enough that he's finally being honest with us? Susan interjected gently, her voice soothing the heated atmosphere. I'm filing for divorce, so what about taking over my company? What's your decision? Robert demanded, his expression stern and unwavering. I can't take it over anymore, Keith replied quietly, his resolve clear despite the turmoil. I see. So are you prepared to take full responsibility? Robert asked, seeking a final confirmation. It might be tough, but I'll manage, Keith replied with a hint of uncertainty. Then do as you please. I won't interfere. From today, you're no longer part of this family. Remember that, Robert declared firmly, his disappointment evident as he left the dining table and exited the room. I'm truly sorry, Keith turned to me with regret in his eyes, pleading for forgiveness. But despite his apology, I couldn't forgive him for the turmoil he had caused in my life. I was resolute about getting a divorce and securing child support to move forward. I contacted the attorney I had spoken with earlier that day, and the process of divorcing Keith began the following day. A few months have passed since then, and I feel like my life has improved, even though it's not as comfortable as before. Despite the challenges, I'm in a better place now. Mom, I'm off to school, Naomi called out. Take care, honey, I replied. Naomi is now in 2nd grade, and I'm navigating life as a single mom. I had to return to work, but it's a far cry from living with Keith, who never truly loved me. After seeing Naomi off to school, I head to work. Interestingly, the company I work for is managed by my father-in-law. We've reconciled, and they've been incredibly supportive, helping me in various ways at work. It turned out that much of what Keith had claimed was untrue, and his parents have apologized for his behavior. Thanks to their support, I was able to join this company. However, after our divorce was finalized, Keith moved in with the person he had an affair with and never returned. He's been consistent with child support payments, given his financial stability. Through hearsay, I've heard he's been wandering the streets late at night, looking worn and troubled. I'm unsure about his current relationship with the person he cheated with, but it no longer concerns me. My focus now is on providing for Naomi and building a stable future for us. Letting go of the past, I've taken the first steps toward a new life. Hello, my name is Janice, and I'd like to share a story filled with twists and turns. One that weaves together themes of love, betrayal, and the pursuit of self-respect. Before diving in, let me introduce the key players in this unfolding drama. The story begins with me, Janice. I was born into a well-off family, a background some might consider privileged. From the outside, it appeared I had it all. A life of luxury from the very start. Yet my parents instilled in me the value of hard work and the importance of earning my keep instead of relying solely on family wealth. My father, a self-made mogul in the engine additive industry, transformed a small niche business into a thriving empire. Meanwhile, my equally industrious mother established a successful chain of beauty salons, becoming a prominent figure in the industry. Their divorce when I was 21 was handled with remarkable grace. They split their assets evenly and maintained a friendship, no small feat in the realm of divorce. My father chose to embrace single life, immersing himself in his business and relishing his independence, while my mother remarried, though I remained her only child. Then there's Matthew, my husband, who would ultimately become the catalyst for a significant upheaval in my life. We married shortly after I graduated college, and I had just begun a job teaching music to energetic children, a role I cherished. Everything seemed perfect until I discovered I was pregnant, and that's when Matthew's true colors began to emerge. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as he lounged on the sofa, Matthew casually suggested I quit my job to stay home with the baby. "Why don't you just quit and stay at home?" "We'll manage," he said, completely unfazed. I was taken aback. Quitting my job was simply not an option on his salary alone, and I loved my work. Yet Matthew dismissed my concerns with a smirk, suggesting we could easily lean on my father's wealth. I was infuriated by his assumption that we could just tap into my parents' resources. This wasn't the first time he'd hinted at it, but discussing it so nonchalantly felt utterly disrespectful. The situation escalated during a dinner with his parents, where he brought it up again. Both his mother, sharp and opportunistic, and his father, who never missed a chance to offer unsolicited advice, enthusiastically supported the idea, painting grand visions of a comfortable life funded by my family's money. Each comment cut deeper, making me feel more like a means to an easier life than a partner in a marriage. That night, as I lay beside Matthew, an overwhelming sense of isolation washed over me. I questioned him softly, hoping I'd misunderstood his intentions. He turned to face me, his eyes once warm, now calculating, and said, "It's not about me, Janice. It's about being smart. Your parents can afford it, and we deserve a break. Why not take advantage of that?" The word deserve echoed in my mind long after he fell asleep. It became painfully clear that our values regarding dignity and independence were fundamentally at odds. This realization marked the beginning of a profound personal journey for me, one in which I would grapple with how much of my values I was willing to compromise. We were on divergent paths, holding on to differing beliefs close to our hearts. I found myself awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with missed warnings and an uncertain future. Despite the initial clash over financial independence and personal pride with Matthew, I clung to a faint hope that we might reconcile our perspectives. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. Enter Matthew's parents, bringing with them a whirlwind of chaos. They were hardly paragons of self-sufficiency, possessing an uncanny ability to seek out handouts. My family's financial stability was like a beacon calling to them. One evening, as we sat in our modest living room, David began pitching a new business venture that he claimed only needed a little startup cash. "Janice, darling," Mary chimed in with her cloyingly sweet tone, "with your family's backing, you could give us a leg up on this. It's practically a sure thing." I struggled to maintain my composure as I replied, "Mary, David, I've mentioned before that we're handling our finances without outside help. My parents' wealth isn't part of this conversation." But David persisted, sounding like a seasoned salesman. "Come on, Janice. You wouldn't even notice the money gone. What's a few thousand to your dad? He probably spends it on golf over a weekend." I was taken aback by their audacity. There they were, comfortably settled in our home, taking advantage of our hospitality while shamelessly eyeing my family's hard-earned wealth as if they were entitled to it. Matthew tried to play mediator, suggesting, "Maybe they have a point. It's just a loan, right? We'd be helping family." The word family left a bitter taste in my mouth. Since when did it become our responsibility to fund his parents' ventures? The atmosphere turned icy. Mary, never one to shy away from drama, exclaimed, Well, I never. Here we thought families supported each other. But if you're going to be stingy. Seeing red, I shot back, working for what you have isn't stingy, Mary. It's called being responsible. Maybe you should consider that. David, trying to ease the tension, intervened. Look, Janice, let's not get upset. We're just talking here. Talking? I retorted sarcastically, frustrated that our conversations always circled back to how my family could solve their problems. After they left, Matthew apologized for his parents' misunderstanding, but I lay awake that night, realizing this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was an outright intrusion by two people who saw me not as a family member but as an easy financial resource. When our daughter Elizabeth was born, I had hoped for a shift in dynamics, but things only intensified. Matthew's parents arrived at the hospital with cheap, clearance-tagged onesies, while my parents brought a beautifully hand-knitted blanket and quality baby essentials. Mary's response to their generosity dripped with scorn and jealousy. Wow, really laying it on thick, aren't they? Must be nice to throw money around. They could have bought you a house instead of all this fluff. Matthew laughed along. Yeah, Mom's right, your folks don't hold back. A house might have been more practical, huh? Holding our newborn, my heart sank. Here I was, a new mother caught between the joy of my daughter's arrival and the unyielding pressure of familial expectations. I was struggling to navigate a path that honored my values while maintaining peace. It dawned on me that this struggle wasn't just about money, it was about respect, boundaries, and the kind of future I wanted for my family. As I cradled my daughter, all Matthew and his parents seemed to focus on was how my parents had chosen to spend their money. Hearing Matthew echo his mother's mercenary thoughts was painful. Did they see our daughter as just another way to secure financial gain? I tried to keep the peace, insisting, it's not about the price tag, it's the thought that counts. But David was relentless. Sure, but think about it. Investing in property now, that's a gift that keeps on giving. The car ride home from the hospital was strained. Matthew tried to reassure me, claiming his parents were just old-fashioned and meant no harm. Doubts began to gnaw at me. Was Matthew's affection genuine, or was he more interested in my family's wealth? A few weeks later, during another uninvited visit, the topic arose again. We were squeezed into our living room, Elizabeth fussing in my arms when Mary couldn't resist commenting on the new stroller my mom had gifted us. Must be nice having your folks shower Elizabeth with all these fancy toys and gadgets. Though a contribution to a house fund would have been more useful, don't you think? Her voice dripped with passive aggression. Matthew, sitting next to his mother, chimed in. Actually, babe, we've been thinking maybe your parents could help with a down payment instead of more baby stuff. Makes sense, right? I was stunned. Not only were Matthew's parents relentless, but now Matthew was echoing their sentiments, turning our daughter's birth into leverage for financial gain. I felt trapped in a twisted reality where love and family were overshadowed by material wealth. Is that what this is about for you, Matthew? Using my parents for money? I couldn't mask the hurt in my voice. I thought we were in this together, for better or worse, not for richer or poorer. Matthew seemed taken aback, but Mary merely sniffed. Well, when your wife's parents are wealthy, it's only practical to think about these things. After they left, I lay awake, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully beside me, and the harsh truth hit me. My marriage and family felt like a transaction, and I was the currency. The ensuing years became a roller coaster. Elizabeth blossomed into a spirited 4-year-old, brimming with life and laughter, but life threw unexpected curveballs. First, it was my mother. Her accident was sudden and devastating. I was engulfed in grief, struggling to hold myself together for Elizabeth's sake. But Matthew's first question wasn't about how I was coping. Instead, he asked, "So, how much are you getting from your mom's will?" It felt like a slap in the face. My mother hadn't even been laid to rest, and there he was, eyeing her legacy like a vulture. According to my mom's will, I inherited the beauty salon chain, something I had no idea how to run. Yet Matthew was eager to step in. "Babe, let me handle this. You know I've got a knack for business," he offered, his usual confidence shining through. Lost in my grief, I allowed him to take the lead, even though I made sure the ownership papers stayed in my name. I hoped, perhaps naively, that he might turn things around for us. But barely a year later, my father passed away from a heart attack. Losing both my parents in such a short time shattered something inside me. I needed Matthew more than ever, but I was beginning to realize that our views on money, support, and family were worlds apart. The day after my father's passing, I was reeling from the loss, hoping for some semblance of sympathy or at least respectful silence from Matthew and his parents. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be. As soon as they walked through the door, David barely hid his excitement, eagerly speculating about the inheritance. "So, Janice, there must be a hefty sum coming your way, huh?" His eyes gleamed with barely contained glee. I saw red. "Can you not, for once, just stop talking about money?" I exploded, my words ringing sharply through the room. Mary adopted an offended demeanor immediately. "Well, I never. We're just concerned about the family's future. No need to be rude." Matthew attempted to smooth things over as usual. "They're just curious. It's a big deal, you know." "A big deal," I echoed, my voice rising in disbelief. "My parents are gone, Matthew. And all you and your parents can think about is cashing in. Is that all I am to you? A bank?" The room fell silent, the tension so thick it felt tangible. Matthew glanced between me and his parents, mumbling a half-hearted apology. But the damage was done. I could no longer stand the sight of their greed, their complete lack of empathy. "Get out," I said, my voice steady but ice-cold. They left, with Mary muttering under her breath and David scowling. Matthew lingered, trying to justify his parents' behavior, but I was beyond listening. 3 days later, Matthew burst through the door, his face alight with what he considered good news. "Baby, I've got awesome news," he exclaimed, barely containing his excitement. "I struck a deal to sell the hair salon chain. Can you believe it?" My jaw dropped. "What? You did what?" Without even asking me, I was seething, a mix of betrayal and disbelief coursing through me. Before we could delve into a serious discussion, his parents showed up, ready to celebrate as if we'd won the lottery. They brought a lavish feast from a fancy restaurant and high-end cigars. Mary was beaming, waving the cigars in my face. "Guess what, honey? We sold the old condo and put down a deposit on a beach house. We're all moving to the coast." I felt as if I were trapped in a nightmare. "Hold on, you what?" "Nobody asked me about moving. I don't want to live by the beach with all that humidity and wind. Are you out of your mind?" Mary dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand. "Oh, don't worry about that. We've booked a crew. You should come with us. It'll be fabulous." "Where is this money coming from?" I demanded, my patience wearing thin. "Well, darling, with your father's passing and the sale of the salons, money's no object now. We're set for life. Think about it. Yachts, private jets. We're living the dream." Mary's eyes sparkled with dollar signs. I turned to Matthew, utterly dumbfounded. "Why are we even talking about selling my mom's business again? And what's this nonsense about being set for life?" "Babe, it makes sense," Matthew insisted. "Managing both businesses will be too much. We need to focus on what's more profitable. It's for our future, for our daughter's future." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The greed, the audacity of it all. It was overwhelming. "Show me the financials for the salon," I demanded. "I want to see everything before we make any rash decisions." Matthew squirmed, avoiding eye contact. "Look, it's all about our future, about making sure we're comfortable," he replied, but his parents chimed in, pressing me to just let go and enjoy the windfall. As they spoke, it became painfully clear that this wasn't just about securing a comfortable future. It was about exploiting my grief and inheritance for their gain. Surveying the scene before me, I felt like vultures were circling overhead. "Why the sudden rush to sell the hairdressing shops?" I pressed, wanting an explanation. With a nonchalant shrug that seemed to dismiss the gravity of the situation, he replied, "Look, after your dad's passing, managing both businesses doesn't add up. We need to concentrate on what's more profitable. The auto oil venture is literally striking gold compared to the salons." His parents quickly joined the conversation, eagerly chiming in. "Think about it, dear. Selling those small shops could set you up for a life of comfort and luxury. Why bother with them?" His mother's voice dripped with greed, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Their blatant avarice made my skin crawl. "I want you all to leave," I demanded, my voice steady and strong. "This is a time for mourning, not for scavenging through what he left behind." Matthew attempted to interject, but I silenced him. "And another thing, this inheritance we're discussing, it's mine. You and your parents have no say in this matter." The room chilled as they realized I wasn't as compliant as they had assumed. With heavy steps and dark skulls, they left, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the looming battle ahead. The day after my father's funeral was bleak, shrouded in a fog of sorrow. Matthew, however, seemed oblivious to the somber mood. Over a lackluster breakfast, he declared, "We need to call a meeting with your father's company executives, pronto." His voice cut through the silence aggressively. I paused, toast in hand, looking at him in disbelief. "Matthew, my father has just been laid to rest. Can't this wait? I need time to process all of this." He dismissed my concerns with a casual flick of his hand, emphasizing that time was money and we had to act swiftly. Frustrated and seeking some solid footing, I contacted our family lawyer for a detailed overview of the barbershop chain's status and insights into my father's business dealings. A month passed, filled with legal jargon and financial statements, during which Matthew and his parents returned, bombarding me with unsolicited advice and greedy propositions. Without even greeting me, Matthew dove straight into conversation. "You know, I've been thinking, I'm the right man to take over your dad's company." His audacious statement left me dumbfounded. But he wasn't finished. "And I'll need a new car, something that fits a business leader. The latest BMW should suffice." Before I could respond, Mary jumped in with her extravagant demands. "The beach house is nearly done. We just need an additional $460,000 for finishing touches and some extra for new luxury furniture. And darling, I expect you to fund an account for my expenses. I need to maintain my lifestyle." Listening to their relentless demands, something within me snapped. "No more." I stood firm, clutching the divorce papers like a protective talisman. I interrupted their chatter, my voice firm and resolute. "Matthew, we need to talk." I placed the documents in front of him on the coffee table. He picked them up, confusion etching his face. "What's this?" he managed to ask, his voice trembling. "Divorce papers," I announced, each word clear and decisive. "I've had the business audited. Matthew, you've driven it to the brink of collapse." As I confronted him about the mismanagement of our business, his face paled, his demeanor that of a child caught in a wrongdoing. "I was trying to make things better," he stammered, his excuses as fragile as his waning confidence. "Make it better by firing our most talented staff and neglecting the essentials that kept the business thriving," I retorted, my voice rising, fueled by a potent mix of anger and betrayal. Mary, ever the meddler, couldn't resist butting in. "Now, dear, let's remember he's entitled to half of everything. Marriage binds assets after all." I couldn't help but laugh, though it was devoid of any joy. "Nice try, but everything's been in my name since before I made the colossal mistake of marrying your son. He gets nothing from me." The room fell silent as their grandiose plans crumbled before my eyes. "And another thing," I continued, fixing Matthew with a firm gaze. "You're going to repay every penny you've cost the business. Every single penny." When the reality of the divorce sank in, Matthew became desperate. "Please, can't we talk about this? There has to be another way," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. Not to be outdone in theatrics, his parents launched into a tearful saga about how they had sunk all their funds into the coastal house, a property now at risk without further investment. "We're going to lose everything," his mother sobbed, tears flowing freely. "Please think of what this means for us." I listened, my heart hardened by their previous actions, feeling nothing but cold detachment. "Sorry, but that's your mess," I said, my tone firm and resolute. With newfound determination, I guided them to the door, closing it behind them and leaving this chapter of my life behind. In the days that followed, I didn't dwell on the past. Instead, I focused on the future. Selling the apartment that Matthew and I once shared provided just enough for a quaint, welcoming house that promised a new beginning for my daughter and me. Stepping into our new home, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a sense of peace enveloping us in a way that had been missing for far too long. The wheels of justice turned slowly but surely. When they finally caught up with Matthew, he was ordered by the courts to compensate for the turmoil he had inflicted on the hairdresser chain. His recklessness had a price, and he was forced to liquidate his share of our old apartment to meet his financial obligations. Watching him be held accountable was a bittersweet vindication for all the hardships he had caused. Out of nowhere, my phone rang one day, and on the other end was my former mother-in-law. Her voice tinged with desperation. "We're in a bind. We need help to buy a place. Any amount would help," she pleaded. Her audacity left me incredulous. I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts before responding. "You made your bed." My tone was steady and resolute. "It's time you lie in it." Ending the call, a mix of emotions washed over me. My anger at their continued sense of entitlement was undeniable, but there was also a profound relief in having finally set firm boundaries. After the tumultuous divorce and reclaiming control over my mother's hairdressing chain, life began to brighten again. It was a challenging journey, but gradually the salons started to regain their former vibrancy, welcoming back the talented stylists we had lost. It felt like a triumphant parade watching them walk through those doors again, ready to weave their magic. It turned out I was more suited for the business world than I had ever imagined. Every day brought new lessons and surprises about what I could achieve. If not for the harsh twists life threw my way, I might never have discovered this capability within myself. Managing my father's car oil business was another challenge, so I decided to hire a manager to oversee operations while I acclimated to the industry. "It's all yours for now, but keep me in the loop," I told him, making it clear that I was still the one in charge. I thought about the future. Maybe when Elizabeth is around 22, I might pass it on to her if she's interested. I wanted her to have options to choose her path. Meanwhile, our new home, just Elizabeth and me, became a sanctuary of peace, a stark contrast to the chaos we had left behind. It was small, but it was ours, a place where we could grow, heal, and start anew. Every corner of our home was filled with laughter, every nook cradling a memory we were creating together. In the garden, Elizabeth's laughter was a balm to my soul. "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be just like you," she said, her eyes alight with wonder and admiration. "You're going to be even more amazing," I responded, pulling her into a hug. Deep down, I knew we were on the brink of something wonderful together. We were unstoppable, ready to embrace whatever the future held with open arms and hopeful hearts. A year into my marriage, life seemed steady until a sudden storm disrupted my calm. My husband unexpectedly announced that I would need to take care of my father-in-law, who had suffered a serious accident and was now incapacitated. This was my first experience with such a situation, and I found myself overwhelmed. To my astonishment, my husband and mother-in-law decided to take a vacation in Hawaii, leaving me behind to tend to his father. They had no idea that this decision would lead to unforeseen tragedy. My name is Marigold, and I'm 32 years old. I've always had a passion for cooking, which led me to work for a major restaurant chain after graduating college. For the past 8 years, I've been in the planning department, where I developed new menu items. It was during this time that I met Merrick, the man who would become my husband. 2 years ago, after a long day, I visited my favorite Japanese pub, a place I frequented for some relaxation. That evening, I took a seat at the counter, and Merrick happened to be sitting next to me. Thanks to the friendly pub owner, we struck up a conversation and quickly discovered we were the same age. We clicked instantly, exchanged contact information, and before long, Merrick began inviting me out for dinner. As we spent more time together, I was drawn to his cheerful, easygoing nature, and it wasn't long before we started dating. After a year, we fell in love and tied the knot just 6 months ago. Now, we live in a cozy apartment conveniently located between our workplaces. With both of us working, I sometimes let house chores slide, but Merrick always reassures me with a smile, saying, "You don't have to be perfect at everything. I'm just happy being with you." His sweet and understanding nature makes me feel fortunate to be his wife. Our life together is filled with love and laughter, and even 6 months into our marriage, we still share heartwarming moments. I truly believed our happiness would last for years to come. Then one day, everything changed. I came home from work expecting the usual cheerful greeting from Merrick, but was instead met with an unsettling silence. Merrick sat in the living room, his gaze fixed on his phone, worry etched across his face. My heart sank as I approached him, sensing something was wrong. "Merrick, are you okay?" I asked, anxiety creeping into my voice. He barely looked up, his voice heavy with dread. "It's my mom," she called. "Your dad had an accident." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I could hardly process what he was saying, but I knew we needed to act quickly. I grabbed Merrick's hand, urging him, "We need to go see him right now." But he shook his head. "We can't go yet." "Why not? Is he not doing well?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. "He's not, but Mom's with him. She'll stay by his side until he gets better." His quiet response only deepened my anxiety. I released his hand and sank into the couch, feeling utterly helpless. My father-in-law had just turned 67 and despite his age, had always been in great health, spending his weekends hiking and golfing. The thought of him lying in a hospital bed felt surreal. I could see that Merrick was struggling too. Not only was his father seriously injured, but he was also the president of the company Merrick worked for. The weight of it all clearly overwhelmed him. A week later, we finally visited my father-in-law in the hospital. He lay in bed, a weak smile barely visible on his face as we entered the room. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to mask my concern. He scratched his head and offered me an apologetic look. "Marigold, I'm sorry for worrying you." "Don't be sorry. I'm just relieved that you're safe," I reassured him. He nodded slowly. "I'm all right, just need some time to recover." His faint smile brought me a measure of relief, but the reality was grim. The accident had left him with a spinal cord injury, and though he could speak, he was paralyzed. The doctors informed us it would take at least 2 months of rehabilitation to assess his condition, and even after being released from the hospital, he would require ongoing care. During this time, Merrick stepped into his father's role as president of the company, at least temporarily. Watching my husband take on such a significant position was strange, yet he handled it well. Still, the stress weighed heavily on him. As we sat in the hospital room, my mother-in-law suddenly pulled me aside, tone sharp and condescending. "Marigold," she began, "don't get any ideas just because Merrick's the president now. That doesn't mean you can start enjoying yourself at his expense." Her accusations stung. "I have my own job and I'm doing just fine," I replied firmly. She gave me a smug look. "Sure, but you knew who Merrick was before you married him, didn't you? You're quite the opportunist." Her insinuation was clear, and this wasn't the first time she had made such remarks. She seemed to believe I had married Merrick for his family's wealth and status, but the truth was, I had no idea about his background when we first met. Still, my mother-in-law's hostility had lingered from the beginning, and I had tried to ignore it. But this time, I couldn't hold back. I couldn't hold back any longer. I didn't marry him for his money, I snapped. Merrick's vibrant personality had always drawn me in, but now I felt a wave of betrayal wash over me. His mother's sharp words hit me hard. "What are you talking about? You speak to me as if you really know who I am." I shot back, but her gaze remained icy. "Exactly, and no matter what you say or do, I will never approve of you," she replied with a smirk. My father-in-law, sensing the rising tension, asked, "Is everything all right?" "It's nothing," she said quickly, glaring at me before turning away. It was painfully clear that my mother-in-law adored Merrick. She probably thought I was just some woman who had married her son for his money, especially since we had tied the knot after dating for only a year. From the very first moment I met her at our wedding, she had been ruthless toward me. I never imagined her sarcasm and hostility would continue, but what troubled me even more was Merrick's apparent worship of her. A few days later, he dropped another bombshell. "Marigold, you know Dad will be released from the hospital in about 2 months, right?" "Yeah, why?" I asked, sensing something was coming. "Well, when that happens, we're moving in with my parents," he said nonchalantly. "What? Where did this come from?" I gasped, taken aback. "Mom suggested it. She said it would be the perfect time for us to move in together. She can't take care of Dad by herself," he explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "But we can't just do this so suddenly," I protested. "What are you talking about? We're all in this together." "Mom's really grateful," he said, brushing off my concerns. I felt utterly confused. It was clear that Merrick and his mother had already made their decision, and my opinion didn't seem to matter. Every time I tried to bring up the subject afterward, Merrick ignored me, and his devotion to his mother only seemed to strengthen. Meanwhile, his attitude toward me grew increasingly critical. "How's the packing going?" he demanded one day. "I won't be able to take time off for the move, so you'll have to handle it all. You're also in charge of the housework and taking care of Dad. Don't let Mom down." His words left me feeling mentally drained, and the looming move only added to my stress. At work, the company was entering its busiest season, and I was struggling to keep up with both my job and the overwhelming task of moving. I was physically and mentally exhausted. 2 months later, we finally moved in, and my father-in-law was discharged from the hospital. There was no time for me to catch my breath. I immediately stepped into the role of caregiver. My day began at 3 o'clock a.m. as I prepared breakfast, did laundry, and then went to help my father-in-law with his morning massage and get him dressed. After breakfast, I would feed him before rushing off to work, always feeling pressed for time. Despite my best efforts, my mother-in-law was never satisfied. Every morning, just as I was about to leave for work, she would stop me. "Marigold, can I have a word?" she'd say. "I'm sorry, I'm running late," I would reply, trying to make my escape. "What's your rush? Sit down. I need to talk to you about breakfast." "It wasn't good enough today," she insisted, her voice dripping with disapproval. "I'll fix it when I get back," I said desperately, eager to leave. But she would raise her voice and demand, "No, sit down now." These confrontations set my heart racing and my head pounding. I started experiencing panic attacks and my stress levels skyrocketed. Each day felt like I was walking on eggshells, desperately trying to avoid triggering her complaints. I was barely making it to work on time, and my coworkers began to notice. They could tell something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to share the truth. 3 months had passed since my father-in-law's return from the hospital, and I felt overwhelmed by my responsibilities. When I got home from work, I had to dive straight into dinner preparations. No matter how quickly I rushed through it, Merrick always found something wrong with every meal. "What is this, Marigold? I come home exhausted and you expect me to eat fish? Really?" he'd say, glaring at the plate in front of him. "I'm sorry," I would mutter. "I had to leave the kitchen to help your father, so I made something quick. You should be making something that boosts my energy." "I didn't want boiled fish," he'd reply, then grab a cup of instant noodles, pouring hot water into it. My mother-in-law watched silently, a smirk playing on her lips as she savored my defeat. Feeling completely crushed, I went to help my father-in-law prepare for bed. He noticed my pale face and asked gently, "Marigold, are you okay? You don't look well." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "I've just been a little stressed with work, that's all." "Is that really it? I've heard a lot of yelling lately from my wife. Is everything all right?" "It's nothing. I'm just not very good at a lot of things," I said, trying to reassure him. I didn't want to burden him with my problems, so I kept smiling. But deep down, my heart was heavy with despair, and the truth was, I wanted to escape. I longed to escape this nightmare, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon my father-in-law. What would happen to him if I left? I couldn't just walk away from everything. The thought haunted me, but there was no clear answer. As the end of the year approached, I finally had some time off work, but even on my days off, there was no respite. On New Year's Eve, Merrick made an outrageous announcement that felt like a twist of the knife. "Mom and I are heading to Hawaii," he said casually while packing his bags. "Hawaii? Now?" I asked, shocked. "Yeah, we've been planning this for a while," he replied as if it were no big deal. "Wait a second, think about your father. How could you possibly leave him like this?" I protested, but my concerns fell on deaf ears. Merrick just smiled smugly. "He's fine with you being here. You're off work, so you might as well do something productive." Both he and my mother-in-law wore triumphant expressions, proud of their plans as they showcased their large carry-on bags. They seemed to find my confusion amusing, struggling not to laugh. Just before stepping out the door, Merrick added, "You'll take care of Dad while we're off to Hawaii. We'll be relaxing, so you handle everything here." With a chuckle, they both left and shut the door behind them. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Why was I left to manage everything alone? Enough is enough. I'm not going to put up with this any longer. I resolved that once they returned from Hawaii, I would file for divorce. I was done being treated like a servant. Until they came back, I decided to dedicate myself entirely to caring for my father-in-law. I stopped doing any extra housework and made a clear plan. I would let everything slide and focus solely on his care. The next morning, I prepared breakfast for him as usual. When I walked into his room with a towel to help him clean up and change, he greeted me with a smile. "Marigold, best wishes for the new year." "Happy New Year to you too, Dad," I replied, though my cheerfulness felt forced. I was still reeling from the events of the previous night. "Where did Merrick and Mom go? They seem to be in a hurry," he asked, looking puzzled. "They went to Hawaii," I said, trying to keep my tone light. I watched his expression shift as he let out a deep sigh. "Hawaii? Really?" He looked skeptical, shaking his head. "What's going on?" Suddenly, his mood changed and he gave me a curious smile. "Marigold, I've been waiting for the right moment to talk to you. I owe you an apology," he began, his voice calm yet serious. "Wait, what do you mean?" I asked, confused about where this was headed. He continued, I've been able to get out of bed on my own for a few days now, but I kept it to myself. I wanted to see how things played out. Confused, I urged him to explain further. Slowly, he revealed everything. He had noticed how I was being mistreated, how Merrick and my mother-in-law had ignored his needs while piling all the responsibility onto me. I asked them to help with small errands, but they refused, he explained. They didn't care at all. It wasn't just that. My father-in-law also shared that he had received complaints from the company's executive director. Apparently, Merrick had been slacking off as acting president, and this trip to Hawaii was the final straw. My father-in-law suspected that Merrick had used company funds to pay for it, so he had asked a representative to monitor Merrick's actions. Sure enough, Merrick's mismanagement and laziness were exposed, injuring everyone at the company. As soon as I get back, I'll be returning as president, my father-in-law told me. And as for Merrick, I'm going to fire him. He's not fit for this role. Then he revealed another surprise. While Merrick and my mother-in-law were away, we were going to change the locks on the house. They won't be coming back here, he said firmly. I was stunned but felt a wave of relief wash over me. Things were finally falling into place. A week passed, and then one afternoon, the doorbell rang. The front door rattled as Merrick and my mother-in-law, fresh from Hawaii, tried to get inside. The intercom buzzed incessantly. I picked it up and calmly greeted them. How was your trip? I asked, feigning cheerfulness. What? Marigold, open the door, Merrick demanded, sounding frantic. We can't get in. I can't do that, I replied coolly. Your father told me not to. What are you talking about? Just open the door already, he pleaded. Oh, and by the way, I continued, I heard your trip was paid for with company funds. Care to explain that? His voice faltered. How? How did you know about that? I watched their shocked faces on the monitor, struggling to hold back my laughter. Just then, my father-in-law joined the conversation, his voice firm and authoritative. So, you really did embezzle money from the company, didn't you? Merrick was taken aback. Dad, you? How are you standing? I've been able to stand for days now, thanks to Marigold helping me with my rehab, he replied. And I know all your behavior at work, thanks to the managing director. You've been lazy and irresponsible. Dad, no, that's not true, Merrick stammered, panic rising in his voice. Enough, my father-in-law cut him off. You're fired. You're no longer welcome at the company. Pack up your things and leave the office immediately. Merrick was now in tears, pleading through the monitor. Marigold, please, you won't leave me, will you? I couldn't hold back any longer. What are you talking about? Do you have any idea what you've put me through? You and your mother have taken advantage of me from the start, forcing me to care for your father while treating me like a servant. Do you even realize how much I've suffered? Calm down, Marigold. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, he cried. Your apology means nothing, I replied coldly. When you left for Hawaii, I realized there was no point in continuing this marriage. I don't want anything more to do with you. I'm done. Merrick stood there, dazed, as my mother-in-law rushed to support him. It was a pitiful sight, mother and son united in defeat. My father-in-law, holding the divorce papers I had picked up earlier, stepped forward and handed them to Merrick. Sign these now, he ordered. Merrick and my mother-in-law signed the papers without protest, knowing they had no other choice. I kicked them out of the house and locked the door behind them, ignoring their pleas as they pounded on the door and begged to be let back in. Since that day, I haven't seen either of them. Rumor has it they're both unemployed and living in a comic book cafe, picking up odd jobs just to get by. It's a far cry from the comfortable life they used to lead, but I believe it's the punishment they deserve. After the divorce, my father-in-law graciously told me, I'll hire a housekeeper from now on. You're free to live your own life. I took his advice and moved into a place closer to my job. Now, I'm living a peaceful, fulfilling life, and I'll always be grateful to my father-in-law for helping me escape that nightmare. I'm determined to repay his kindness in any way I can. I've been happily married for 5 years, living with my thoughtful husband. We shared a close bond, eagerly anticipating the arrival of children, though we haven't had any yet. However, life took an unexpected turn following a recent incident, and I feel compelled to share this remarkable story. My husband is universally regarded as kind, a sentiment echoed by both my parents, who hold him in high esteem. My sister, a dedicated career woman, has always focused primarily on her work, but she and my husband got along well despite her typically reserved demeanor. Recently, his work responsibilities intensified dramatically. He began returning home late and even started working on his scheduled days off. As a new team leader, he was often glued to his cell phone, coordinating with his team at all hours. While some might have found his sudden change in routine suspicious, I saw it as a commitment to his job, worrying instead about the toll it was taking on his health. Amid these changes, my sister decided to relocate for a new job opportunity that required her to furnish her new apartment. I planned to drive her to the furniture store on Saturday to help her out, but an unexpected call from my boss required my immediate presence at work, leaving me in a bind. Thankfully, that Saturday was one of my husband's rare days off. Despite his recent busyness, he graciously offered to help when he saw my predicament. It was slightly awkward for him to spend the day alone with my sister, but he agreed and even asked to borrow my car since his was in the shop. Grateful for his kindness, I went to handle the emergency at work. This was the first time my husband and sister had spent time together without me, and as I dealt with my responsibilities, I couldn't help but wonder how they were managing on their own. I hoped they were making the most of their unexpected day together and finding everything my sister needed for her new place. After resolving the issues at work, it was already dark by the time I checked my phone, planning to meet my husband and sister for dinner. However, I was caught off guard by a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end asked if I was a family member of David. Confused, I confirmed my identity as his wife. That's when the police officer delivered the shocking news. My husband had been in a car accident, and both he and his passenger, my sister, were unconscious. In a blur, I rushed to the hospital. Upon arriving at the emergency department, I gave my name and was quickly escorted to the intensive care unit. Through the glass, I could see my husband surrounded by machines, his body covered in bandages. My heart sank as I stood there, anxious about what the future held for him. Later that night, my mother arrived from far away to support us through this ordeal. As we waited anxiously, a police officer provided more details about the accident. He explained that David had been driving on a well-lit road when another car, which had run a red light, struck his vehicle. The driver of that car was also seriously injured and receiving treatment at the same hospital. However, this driver claimed that David's car had been behaving erratically before the crash, leading the police to investigate whether he might have fallen asleep at the wheel. After several tense days, both my husband and sister regained consciousness, and the doctors began conducting several tests. When my mother and I were called in for the results, the doctors delivered some difficult news. While they assured us that David and my sister would survive, they warned us that both might face lasting disabilities. Despite this grim prognosis, my mother and I felt relieved that they were alive. We clung to the hope that with rehabilitation, they could recover to some degree. Choosing to focus on the positive, we decided not to share the potential long-term impacts of their injuries with them. Instead, we surrounded them with encouragement and care, grateful for their survival. My mother took on the role of caring for my sister while I dedicated myself to looking after my husband. In the early days after the accident, he was visibly shaken, struggling both emotionally and physically. He was deeply troubled, not just by his own condition but also by the impact the accident had on all of us. As time passed, the man who had always been gentle and kind began to change. Frustration took hold, particularly regarding his impaired mobility and the ongoing medical treatments he faced. The reality of having to leave his job weighed heavily on his mind, and despite my efforts to support him, his irritability grew. I continued to visit him regularly at the hospital, determined to be there for him. During one of these visits, a police detective approached me with new information about the accident. He explained that there had been a leak in the brake oil of my car, likely contributing to the vehicle's erratic behavior before the crash. This revelation suggested that an accident might have been inevitable, either for me or someone else. Additionally, I learned that the woman who had crashed into us was also suffering. Her mother approached me to apologize, marking our first encounter since the incident. As days turned into weeks, my husband's frustration escalated. He grew increasingly resentful of my mobility and independence, angered by the contrast between our situations. His frustration often manifested in demanding behavior and outbursts of anger when I couldn't meet his needs as quickly or fully as he wanted. Objects were thrown and harsh words exchanged over minor issues, such as my decision to step out to buy lunch. The demands and complaints grew more frequent and intense, adding to the strain of our situation. I empathized deeply with my husband's pain and frustration, but the reality of our situation required me to balance my time between supporting him and fulfilling my responsibilities. I needed to work to support us financially, stay updated on the police investigation, and coordinate with the hospital regarding his care. Despite the challenges and his occasional outbursts, I remained committed to helping him through his recovery, hoping that with time, patience, and care, we could navigate this difficult period together. However, I barely had a moment to myself anymore. My husband's demeanor had become increasingly difficult to manage, leaving me feeling cornered by the escalating tensions. Similarly, my sister was grappling with her own frustrations, and our mother appeared visibly worn out from the strain. I learned that my sister was placing even heavier demands on our mother, who was already stretched thin from not working and caring for both of us. Whenever I couldn't visit the hospital, both my husband and sister became more despondent. Hearing from doctors that they might remain paralyzed despite ongoing rehabilitation efforts added to the stress. The issue of my car's brake oil leak soon came to a head. My sister confronted me, her tone accusatory. "I heard your car was leaking oil. You were supposed to maintain it. Because of your negligence, I can't work or return to normal. Mom's stressed and your husband is suffering. You're going to have to take care of us for the rest of your life." Her harsh words took me by surprise, prompting me to call our mother, who confessed that my sister had been in a distressed mental state for quite some time. Despite the tension, my concern for my husband drove me to the hospital, only to find that he was not in his room. I eventually found my husband in the common room, quietly sitting with my sister. The visiting hours were about to end, leaving them alone in the otherwise empty space. It was there that my husband coldly remarked, "If you had just taken the car in for inspection, maybe none of this would have happened." His glare was piercing as he added, "Yeah, and now you're the reason your sister and I are in this mess. The insurance will cover some of it, but you'll be taking care of us for the rest of your lives. Remember that." His words struck me like a punch, igniting a surge of emotions within me. Surprised and hurt, I responded, "Since when have you become so close to my sister?" "What do you mean by that?" He shot back, "You don't come around often, and your mom even texted your sister to visit since we're both stuck here and can't walk. What's wrong with talking to your husband?" The situation felt overwhelming, and it was clear that the stress and fear of our new reality were profoundly affecting everyone's emotions and actions. Feeling increasingly isolated, I sensed my husband and sister were aligning against me. With a hint of sarcasm, I tried to lighten the mood. "Right? You two haven't spent much time together before the accident, have you?" Ignoring my tone, my husband replied, "What are you talking about? We're discussing you taking care of us. And you know that." My sister avoided my gaze but nodded in agreement, as if to confirm their expectation of my lifelong support. I hadn't anticipated a straightforward answer from either of them, but I pressed on, hoping to make them see my perspective. Switching topics, I casually mentioned, "I wonder how the person who hit your car is doing now." "How should I know?" My sister retorted defensively. "She hit us when the light was red. It's just unbelievable." "That's right. You can't imagine how terrifying it was," my husband chimed in. "We need to make sure we get compensation from her. I was so close to getting a promotion too." As their complaints continued, I realized it was time to clarify some facts. "There's something you both need to know. First off, I had my car inspected just before the accident," I said. "Oh, did you? Then the dealer should be sued. There's no way they didn't know the brake fluid was leaking." My sister quickly interjected. "That's right," I agreed. "After the accident, the police contacted me to examine the car and determine the cause. They wanted to check my drive recorder, but that old recorder doesn't capture sound and doesn't start recording right after an accident, so it's not very useful." My husband dismissed my explanation. "That's where you're wrong," I corrected him gently. "You didn't know that I replaced the old drive recorder with a new one, did you?" My sister looked up in surprise. "What?" "I also installed an additional camera inside the car," I continued. Her face grew increasingly pale as I spoke. The new drive recorders can start recording with even the slightest shake of the car. The police have already contacted me about the data they've obtained. My husband's expression shifted to confusion, while my sister appeared so pale that she looked ready to collapse. Facing them directly, I confronted her. You were up to something, weren't you? What exactly did you do to the car? Why are you addressing my sister like that? My husband panicked, his voice shaky as he grappled with the implications of my words. You talked to her as if she were your girlfriend. I reminded him. I told you that a slight vibration would activate the recording, and it captured many intimate moments between you two. My words left him speechless, and the color drained from his face as I revealed how the police had inquired about the woman in the car with him. It was painfully clear now. His affair with my sister had been exposed. You've been deceiving me all this time. I confronted them, the revelation hitting hard. My husband, cornered and desperate, began to deflect blame onto my sister. Linda isn't the only one at fault here, he stammered. Just then, the mother of the woman who crashed into my car entered the room. I had invited her, hoping for some resolution or understanding. Don't you have anything to say to her? I challenged my sister, who recoiled at the sight of the distraught woman. Wow, who's this? My sister exclaimed, taken aback. She's the mother of the woman who crashed into you, I explained, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil swirling inside me. My husband fell silent, finally realizing who she was as I continued, and she's also the mother of Marilyn, the woman who was your victim. At the mention of the name Marilyn, both my husband and sister went pale, panic washing over their faces. What is this? Do you know the woman who was driving the car? My sister demanded, her voice trembling with shock and confusion. My husband, at a loss for words, looked utterly defeated. That's when I decided to lay everything bare. She was having an affair with David. He promised her a divorce but never followed through. When Marilyn falsely claimed she was pregnant to manipulate him, David told her to get an abortion and cut off contact. Devastated and seeking revenge, Marilyn targeted me, aiming to hurt me through you. I connected the dots of this malicious cycle spurred by deceit and betrayal. So you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, I concluded, the weight of the situation settling over us. I can't believe something like this has upended our lives, my sister murmured, the magnitude of the betrayal dawning on her. I looked at them, my voice quiet but firm. No matter how much you cry or scream now, it changes nothing. This tragedy wasn't the result of an innocent bystander's actions. It was woven through a web of lies and vengeance that you both were part of. The room fell silent, the harsh truth echoing among us as we faced the painful consequences of their actions. Pouring all my emotions into my words, I made sure they understood the gravity of what had happened. You were carrying on an affair behind my back, and Linda, you tampered with the brake fluid of my car, intending to hurt me. Yet ironically, you ended up in the accident yourself. I am the true victim in this mess, I explained, bitterness clear in my voice as I revealed the depth of my disillusionment. I had contemplated not pursuing a divorce if you'd have shown even a hint of remorse during your hospital stay and honestly explained everything. However, you never once expressed any regret. Instead, you treated me with contempt. Pausing to let that sink in, I reminded them, do you remember how we jokingly filled out those divorce papers right after we got married? I never thought I'd actually use them, but today I filed them. So, you're no longer married. This is goodbye. With that, I left the dark, quiet hospital, feeling a profound sense of liberation, expressing all the pent-up resentment had freed me in a way I anticipated. Yet the aftermath of this revelation was not without its consequences. My mother was deeply shocked by the entire ordeal. The betrayal by my sister pained her, and the realization that she would have to care for her physically disabled daughter alone was overwhelming. While I had severed my ties with David and Linda, I couldn't bear to leave my mother to handle everything on her own. To help alleviate some of the burden, I approached the woman responsible for the accident, facilitating the necessary apologies and discussions about compensation, ensuring my sister, who was inadvertently involved, would be taken care of financially. This was the least I could do to prevent my mother from being overly burdened. 3 years have passed since that tumultuous time. My ex-husband and I are now divorced, and I've moved on. But the scars from those revelations and the weight of my decisions linger, a constant reminder of the complexities of relationships and the unexpected turns life can take. Now, I'm living on my own. During my marriage, David and I were perceived as a close couple, so our divorce shocked my coworkers. Afterward, I noticed an increase in attention from male colleagues, which I attributed to the notion that divorced women might appear more approachable or intriguing to some men. Despite this newfound attention, the lingering image of my ex-husband made dating unappealing to me. Instead of pursuing romantic relationships, I channeled my energies into advancing my career. I diligently studied for a certification exam and enrolled in an online business school that I could attend after work. I had never envisioned myself pursuing such a path. I never envied my sister, the career woman, and never thought I'd aspire to be one. Yet there I was, naturally gravitating toward this new goal. Life certainly has its twists. Since then, my ex-husband has moved back in with his parents, but it seems he has become a burden to them. His relatives blame him for his poor behavior and the way he treated me, and I've heard he's not doing well mentally. He's been acting out violently, causing trouble for those around him. My sister also returned to her parents' home, but her mental state has deteriorated further, and she continues to exhibit selfish behaviors. My mother, worn out from the ordeal, used my sister's savings and the accident compensation to place her in a care home. She consulted me before making this decision, and seeing no reason to object, I told her to do whatever she felt was necessary. Navigating these changes, I learned to adapt and focus on my personal growth, realizing that sometimes the most challenging situations lead to unexpected paths and new beginnings. At one point, I feared I would end up caring for both of them for the rest of my life, a prospect that felt like servitude. However, everything changed when I passed the certification exam I had been working toward. This achievement led to a transfer to a department where I could effectively utilize my new skills. During this period of professional growth, I grew close to the instructor of the online business school I attended. Soon, we began to plan a future together. Unlike my past relationship, he isn't just kind to everyone, he shows a special kindness toward me. For instance, if I'm working late, he makes it a point to come home early and prepare dinner for us. This thoughtful gesture means the world to me, and I've come to cherish these moments of simple happiness. Now, as I head home after a long day, I often find myself smiling at the thought of seeing him. I look up at the stars, grateful for the turn my life has taken, and feel eager to return to the warm home we've built together. This is the last gift I will ever give you, my husband declares coldly, sliding the divorce papers across the table. He confesses his plan to marry someone else, reducing me to nothing more than a financial asset he's used for years. The man I've shared so many intimate moments with has revealed himself to be utterly despicable. This marks the beginning of my tale of vengeance. My name is Helen, and this year, as I turn 52, I face a pivotal moment. Tomorrow isn't just another day. It's the end of a long period of debt that I will finally settle. My husband Scott and I have poured our sweat and tears into our life together since we tied the knot 22 years ago when I was 32 and he was 34. He owned a liquor store, a family business passed down from his late parents, while I worked in an office. We met through a mutual friend and quickly started dating, leading to marriage. Back then, my only worry was whether he'd expect me to help run the store. I was a financial consultant, advising individuals and businesses on insurance and investments. I earned a decent salary, loved my work, and was studying for a certification to further advance my career when Scott proposed. He assured me he supported my ambitions wholeheartedly. I know how hard you've been working for your certification, and I want to support you in any way I can, he said. He had enough staff to manage the store, so he encouraged me to chase my dreams. His support was crucial in my decision to marry him. He seemed genuinely kind and always in my corner. We entered our marriage with a clear understanding. He would manage his business, and I would focus on my career. Our future seemed bright. However, about a year into our marriage, things began to shift. One afternoon, while I was enjoying a rare day off, I decided to vacuum under the bed. The vacuum snagged on something, a pile of papers. We had only moved in less than 8 months ago, so the mess surprised me. I curiously picked up a crumpled sheet and smoothed it out. The bold header instantly caught my attention. Reminder of payment. Below that, an outstanding debt of $320,000 in Scott's name stared back at me. It wasn't $3,000 or even $30,000. It was a staggering, life-altering amount. My heart pounded as I tried to comprehend why he'd hidden this from me. As soon as Scott returned home, I confronted him. "What is this debt? What's going on?" He didn't hesitate. "It's not what you think. This debt was left by my parents," he explained, his voice calm. It wasn't personal debt, but one tied to his liquor store, inherited alongside the business. The debt was secured against both the store's land and the house we lived in. Scott had no intention of renouncing the inheritance, no matter the risk. While it wasn't his fault, the debt was real and couldn't be ignored. "This is a payment reminder," I said, pointing at the paper. "Aren't you supposed to be making monthly payments?" "I do," he replied, though there was a hint of strain in his voice. "But sales can be inconsistent, especially during slower months." That was the moment I realized our marriage and everything we built was on shaky ground, and that this secret debt would soon unravel everything. "I can't cover the payments right now. I have to prioritize paying my staff, so I've asked the creditors to wait." Scott's explanation seemed reasonable at first, but the bold final notice on the reminder was hard to ignore. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry," he quickly added. "Don't stress about it. The business is doing well overall. Look, we haven't been evicted or anything, right?" Though what he said was technically true, the fact that he had kept this from me, not at me. I stared at him, my anxiety evident, but before I could process it further, he threw me a curveball. "If you're so worried, why don't you help pay it off? You're earning quite a bit, aren't you?" His suggestion sent a wave of unease through me. The store wasn't mine, and yet, in a marriage, aren't partners supposed to support each other? "My debt is your debt too," he added abruptly. "If my store went under, it would affect a lot of people. It's become crucial to the community." I couldn't deny that. His store was a cornerstone of the neighborhood, nestled in the suburbs where other shops and supermarkets were few and far between. He didn't just sell liquor, he offered fresh goods like meat and fish and even provided a home delivery service. I'd been to the store many times, and I had seen firsthand how much the customers appreciated its presence. It wasn't just a business, it was a lifeline for many. "Please, I need your help with the debt," he pleaded, his eyes sincere. "I'll keep focusing on the business, but I can't do this without you." His dedication to his work was undeniable. The thought of the store closing wasn't just painful for him, it would also be a loss for the entire community. I felt the weight of the decision pressing on me. Being married means supporting each other through thick and thin, I reminded myself. If he was struggling, wasn't it only right for me to step in? "Okay, I'll help," I finally said, though my voice felt heavier than usual. "I'll put as much as I can toward the debt every month from my salary. You focus on running the store." I agreed, hoping this would stabilize things. After all, while I could help financially, the store was his responsibility to manage. At the time, I was relieved that he trusted me with something so important. But looking back, this was the moment everything began to change. 4 years passed since I started contributing to the debt, and in that time, Scott's late nights became more and more frequent. He would stumble in at all hours, reeking of alcohol. "What kept you out so late? You smell like a bar," I'd ask, trying to mask my growing concern. "Just had a few drinks with some customers," he'd respond casually, brushing it off. But with each late night, my worry deepened. Something was shifting, and I feared what might come next. When I asked, "Did you make this month's payment?" his response didn't come as easily as it should have. His tone was laced with condescension. "I did last week," he said. "You know the store relies on you. You better keep up with the payments," he added dismissively. At first, I brushed off these comments, thinking they were just the ramblings of a drunk. But as his demands became more frequent, they started to grate on me. It became clear that Scott genuinely believed it was entirely normal for me to shoulder his financial burdens. "By the way, Benjamin just had his third kid," he mentioned offhandedly one day. Benjamin, his old high school friend, was also a business owner whose wife worked alongside him in their store. His comment made me reflect on our situation, and I finally voiced the question that had been lingering in my mind. "I've been meaning to talk to you," I said, trying to gather my courage. "Don't you think it's time for us to start a family?" Scott's reaction was cold and dismissive. "A baby? My business is just beginning to pick up, and we're still in debt. How can we even think of that responsibility now?" His firm stance stunned me. "But Benjamin has 3 children," I countered, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Surely we can manage one?" "His situation is different," Scott retorted sharply. His parents are still around to help, and his wife is actively involved in the business. We're not in the same position. His words crushed my hopes. So, until all your debts are cleared, we can't even consider having a baby? I asked, seeking some form of clarity. That's how it's going to be, he said bluntly. If you make enough money and pay off the debts quickly, then I'll think about it. His smirk made my stomach churn, but it also fueled a determination in me. I was naively committed, driven by the desire to start a family, even if his demands were irrational. I threw myself into work with renewed dedication, pursuing additional qualifications, taking on promotional exams, and securing salary increases, all in the hopes of resolving the debt faster and finally starting the life I had envisioned. I had started to earn significantly more than most women my age, even making advanced payments on Scott's debts. My efforts were relentless, fueled by a mixture of hope and desperation. The debt hung over us like a constant shadow, and before I knew it, I was 40. The dream of having children had slowly slipped away. Despite this, I comforted myself with the thought that I still had my husband Scott. He needed me, and I believed in our life together. That belief kept me content. As the years passed, Scott began coming home later and later. Sometimes he wouldn't return until the next morning, always with the excuse that he had been with a customer and lost track of time. He was working hard to keep the store afloat, or so he said. Seeing his supposed dedication, I felt compelled to continue supporting him. We were in this together, I thought, sailing toward a better future. The years rolled on, and finally, the day approached when I would make the last payment on the debt. All the sacrifices, all the luxuries I had foregone. Soon, I wouldn't have to hold back anymore. I could finally enjoy the money I worked so hard for. Reflecting on our marriage, I realized how much of our life had revolved around finances. We had never taken a real vacation or even enjoyed a nice dinner out. Now in our 50s, I hoped we could start enjoying those things. On the day the final payment was due, I took the day off work to prepare a special celebration. I cooked an elaborate dinner, complete with a bottle of wine and Scott's favorite chocolate cake. I set the table beautifully, eager to celebrate our newfound financial freedom together. As I stood back, admiring the set, I thought about how quickly the last 22 years had flown by. It feels like it's been a long time, but the last 22 years have gone by so fast, haven't they, honey? I remarked as Scott walked in. His head was bowed, and his shoulders were trembling. Was he crying from happiness? Or was there another reason behind his emotion? To my utter shock, he erupted into a laughter I had never heard before, cold, mocking, almost sinister. What the hell is going on? Are you okay? I asked, bewildered and alarmed. With an air of audacity, Scott looked me in the eye and made a shocking declaration. You are dismissed now. I'm grateful to you for the past 22 years. Thanks to you paying off all my debt, I'm a free man. Great job. I don't need you anymore. His words left me stunned. What are you talking about? I managed to say, genuinely confused. He pulled a document from his bag and slid it across the table. This is my last present to you, he said smugly. The bold letters of a divorce petition seared into my vision. Proudly, he continued, I've decided to marry someone else, so you're no longer of any use to me. Thanks for being my cash dispenser until now. I stared at him, heart pounding. Are you getting remarried? Have you been cheating on me this whole time? I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. His smirk told me everything I needed to know. I asked, piecing together the puzzle of his habitual late returns, all under the pretense of work or social engagements, while I worked tirelessly to clear his debts. His smug expression didn't falter for a second. I'm not unfaithful, he said casually. I've already found my next wife. I wanted to divorce you and marry her, which is why I waited for you to finish paying off my debt. Tears welled up as the absurdity of the situation hit me. The lavish feast I had prepared blurred before my tear-filled eyes. Get the hell out of here, he snapped, thrusting the divorce papers at me. My anger surged, boiling my blood faster than any sorrow or despair could settle in. Okay, but you'll regret this, I forced the words out, determined not to let him break me. No, I won't, he sneered. Why would I regret divorcing an old hag like you? Old hag? I thought to myself, almost amused. If I'm an old hag, then you're an old fart. His delusional self-image was so ridiculous it actually helped me regain my composure. Taking the divorce papers in hand, I declared calmly, I'm going to take this with me for now. With a heavy heart, I gathered my belongings and walked out of the home we had shared for 22 years. The abrupt end to my marriage left me reeling. Alone at last, tears of emptiness and frustration streamed down my face. I needed closure and justice. Soon after, I consulted with my attorney to draft a proper divorce agreement and sent it to Scott. I'd also requested a background check on his new fiancée, determined to understand what I was up against. Not long after, Scott called me, his voice thick with fury. "Hey, Helen, what the hell is this document?" he barked. I could almost imagine his face turning a deep shade of red on the other end. "It's a divorce agreement. What about it?" I replied, keeping my tone calm and even. "I know what it is," he spat, "but what's this about a loan agreement? Why do I have to pay you back?" His voice was filled with disbelief and anger, confused by the financial claims I had laid out. "This isn't just about a loan. It's about the money I paid on your behalf during our marriage," I explained. He struggled to grasp the situation, protesting, "You chose to make those payments out of your own goodwill? This is ridiculous. Why are you bringing all this up now?" "Because," I said, my voice steady, "our circumstances have changed, and you'll face the consequences." "I did it as your wife," I responded firmly, "but if we're getting divorced, that changes things. It's only fair you repay me." The reality of the situation seemed to hit him then. He hadn't considered the financial implications when he asked for the divorce. Armed with my years of experience working in insurance and investments and my connections with top-tier attorneys, I was prepared. The amount he owed me, including interest, was over $360,000. I was adamant about getting exactly that amount back. When he saw the name of a well-known local attorney on the document, he finally grasped the seriousness of the situation. "You know I don't have that kind of money," he protested weakly. "Sell the store to fund it then. If that's what it takes, so be it," I suggested. His response turned desperate. "If I do that, I won't have anything left." "You're only 54, I pointed out. "You can still find a job. It's time you figured it out, just like I have." My resolve was clear. I was determined to start my next chapter on my own terms, free from his debt and deceit. The conversation was going nowhere, and I was ready to end the call, but curiosity got the better of me. "So, how's it going with your new bride-to-be?" I asked casually. "None of your business," he snapped back. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. His tone said it all. It sounded like things weren't going as planned. "Good luck," I said, amusement still in my voice as I prepared to hang up. "Wait a minute," he interrupted urgently. "I've decided not to marry her. We can start over," he pleaded. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Start over? Don't kid yourself. I don't want you," I yelled, finally losing my patience. I hung up, my head spinning with disbelief. Had I looked as ridiculous as him during our 22 years together? I had respected him once, watching him work tirelessly for his store and customers. But now, it was clear he was just a fool. The story of his remarriage had started innocently enough. He had flirted with a part-time university student named Elizabeth, saying, "You're so cute, Elizabeth. Will you be my wife?" She played along, jokingly responding, "Well, I'd think about it if you made me a full-time housewife." But he took her seriously. The idea of marrying a man over 40 years her senior was nothing but a joke to her, until he began pressing her persistently. It got serious enough that her parents intervened and obtained a restraining order against him. Reading the private investigator's report, I laughed so hard I started hyperventilating. All those nights he'd come home late, spitting stories of working late at the store. It had all been a lie, and the truth was utterly absurd. I used to think he was slaving away for his business, but in reality, he was spending his nights at bars and strip clubs, hitting on younger women, boasting about his so-called charm. "I'm surprisingly popular with young girls," he'd say, grinning smugly. "I'm a salesman, so I have this approachable aura. I get along with everyone." The report revealed the sad truth. His delusions were laughable. He'd tell the girls, "People often say I look young. Don't you think so?" They cringed, but he remained oblivious. To him, I was just a source of money, and his distorted view of himself turned him into a ridiculous figure, nearly landing him in legal trouble. Ironically, he wasn't unfaithful, not because he was loyal, but because he wasn't appealing enough to find a mistress. The whole mess started when his friend Benjamin became a grandfather. Enviously, my ex declared he wanted a grandchild too. I sharply reminded him that he could hardly afford to think like that while I was clearing his debts. He was humiliated. Looking back, I'm relieved I didn't waste my golden years with him. After we divorced, there was confusion over property division, but he didn't fight the settlement. My lawyer had a reputation for being tough, and it made me wonder how someone as spineless as him had ever run a business. In the end, he had to sell his shop to pay me off. Just before the sale, all his employees quit, and his customers were outraged that he was selling the family business to settle a divorce. It sent shockwaves through our community, but many felt he got what he deserved. The whole ordeal became a local spectacle, almost comedic in its absurdity. Even if he hadn't sold the shop, the negative publicity would have run him out of business eventually. Selling before hitting rock bottom was probably the only smart decision he made. Still, the sale didn't cover everything, so he's stuck working part-time to pay me back. Occasionally, he still sends me messages, admitting fault and begging for a reunion. Even after blocking him, he tries from new numbers. My attorney warned him that if he contacts me again, we pursue a restraining order. Thankfully, the calls have stopped since then. Looking back, I realize how fortunate I am to have escaped a life tied to his failures and fantasies. His desperate chase after a youthful mirage not only embarrassed him but also alienated everyone around him. Now, as he continues his part-time work to settle his debts, I'm grateful for the peace and independence I've found. His story is a cautionary tale about living beyond one's means and the dangers of refusing to accept reality. As for me, guess what I'm doing now? I'm a marriage counselor. At 52, I joined a friend's matchmaking service, a complete shift from my previous career in finance and insurance. Back then, I helped singles manage practical life aspects but craved something more personally fulfilling. So, I took the leap into helping people find love. In my current role, I focus on helping couples start their relationships on the right foot, encouraging open, honest discussions about important issues like money and future plans. Our direct approach has resonated with clients and membership has soared. Having lived through my own ups and downs, I'm driven by a desire to help others avoid the mistakes I made. Though I earn less than before, the joy I feel from helping people build lasting relationships is immeasurable. Every day, I guide people toward happiness, and this work has become my new source of fulfillment. After separating from my ex, I discovered my own happiness, and now I'm helping others find theirs. Each day brings a new opportunity to make a positive impact, and this role has given my life a deep sense of purpose. You're useless. You can't even handle the chores or take care of the kids, let alone pay the AL money. Kyle finally showed up at the hospital 3 weeks after my car accident, saying these mean things without caring about me lying there in the hospital bed. At first, I hoped Kyle came because he cared about me, but I was disappointed. I sighed deeply. Honestly, I had already been thinking about getting a divorce. I didn't expect Kyle to bring it up now, but I guess it's a good thing. It saved us both some trouble. Fine, I agreed quickly, which surprised Kyle. He didn't know I was already ahead of him. I wanted to tell him I knew what he was planning and was secretly laughing at him in my head. My name is Sarah. I'm a 40-year-old housewife living with my husband Kyle and our 7-year-old daughter Lisa. Kyle and I met during a group blind date and got married when I was 30. He was easy to talk to, and eventually I fell for him, and we started dating. Kyle was charming, the most handsome man at the table when we first met. When he showed interest in me, I felt flattered and proud. Kyle was incredibly romantic in our early days. He would surprise me with desserts and flowers at fancy restaurants for my birthdays, take me on trips for our anniversaries, and write heartfelt letters at just the right moments. I felt so lucky to have him and eagerly accepted his marriage proposal, imagining a life full of surprises and excitement even after marriage. But once we were married, things changed. Hey Sarah, my dinner isn't ready yet. I've been working all day, and you can't even have dinner prepared when I get back. You're so lazy. After we got married, Kyle started acting like he was the boss of the house and I was his servant. At first, I was shocked by how different he was. I thought he was just joking when we were dating. We used to laugh at each other's silly jokes. We imagined a sweet life where we'd call each other cute nicknames and stay lovey-dovey even after having kids. But he wasn't joking. He really treated me like a servant. At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was kidding. But then I realized he was serious. He actually saw me as his caretaker, and that scared me. After we got married, I had to quit my job, and we depended on the money Kyle earned. I was afraid that if I didn't do what he said, he might cut me off financially, so I felt trapped. Honestly, Kyle's income wasn't great. I made more money when I was working. Kyle only finished high school and kept changing jobs. He never stayed at a job for more than a year or two. It seemed like Kyle felt insecure about his background and took out his frustrations on me. "I'm sorry I got delayed with some errands," I told him once. "Don't make excuses, just hurry up and make it," Kyle replied, sitting down with a cold beer. This became a common scene, but each time I sighed and started cooking. My marriage made me miserable, but I managed to get by. The following year, our daughter Lisa was born, and my days became even more difficult. As expected, Kyle didn't help much with Lisa. However, he would spoil her by buying her any candy or toy she wanted. I tried to raise Lisa properly, so I scolded her when needed, which made her cling to Kyle even more. "Lisa, you like Daddy, don't you?" Kyle asked her once. "Yeah, Daddy is cool." "I love Daddy," Lisa replied. "I knew it. I'm super dad," Kyle said, looking at me smugly. It was frustrating, but I couldn't help feeling glad that Lisa loved her father. I just sighed again. Despite spoiling her, Kyle never attended any of Lisa's kindergarten events like sports festivals or recitals. "You know, there's a parent-child race at Lisa's sports festival. Could you participate?" I asked him. "Huh? Why me?" "You're free that day, you do it," he responded. "But the sports festival could be a great time for us to bond as parents. It's on a holiday, so you won't have to work," I said to Kyle. "Shut up. We're already close enough. Maybe you should work on your relationship with Lisa. She thinks you're mean, you know. You might want to fix that," Kyle said, laughing as he left for work. He called himself a super dad, yet he never showed up to school events. I worried that Kyle's habit of being easy on himself but hard on others might influence Lisa. He continued to leave all the housework and childcare to me and was lazy at home. Now Lisa is 5 years old and ready to start elementary school, but Kyle was still jumping from job to job. He had just quit his factory job last month and moved to a food and beverage company. "I'll be working weekends at my new job since it's in the food industry," he said. "Looks like we'll hardly see each other then," I replied. "Can't be helped. It's work," he said. Honestly, I was relieved because I was tired of Kyle ordering me around on weekends. Now, I wouldn't have to be nagged by him to clean the floor or serve meals quickly. But if Kyle was out on weekends, Lisa would be sad. It's better for kids to spend holidays with the whole family. "I have work, so please let Lisa know," Kyle said. I couldn't really argue with Kyle since he was the one bringing in the money. Reluctantly, I went to tell Lisa. "I'm sorry, but Daddy won't be able to go out with you on his day off," I said, frowning, thinking she would be upset. However, contrary to my expectations, Lisa seemed unconcerned. "It's okay. If you're okay with it, then it's fine. You know, he's not going to be here on all weekends, right?" "Daddy has been smelling strange lately," she said. "A strange smell?" I asked, puzzled. Lisa nodded and went back to her room. What on earth was she talking about? I've been so busy with housework and taking care of our child that I hadn't noticed much about Kyle lately. Our marriage was not like it used to be, and I tried to avoid being around Kyle to keep things calm. The strange smell Lisa mentioned might be from the factory, I thought. Factories often use special solvents, so it made sense that Kyle could come home with a weird smell. If that was the case, the smell would probably go away soon. Kids are really honest, which is what makes them so endearing. Despite what he said, Kyle started leaving the house early in the morning even on his days off, which was odd. He also left every weekday. If he was working weekends, he should have a day off during the week. He left without saying anything to me, so I couldn't tell if he was going to work or not. I became curious about what he was doing, leaving so early even on his days off. One day, I asked Kyle, "You seem to be going out every day off. What are you doing?" Kyle looked confused for a moment, then answered in an annoyed tone while scratching his head. "I'm working. I go to work voluntarily." "Really? But you should take care of yourself, or your body won't hold up," I replied. "Shut up. Don't complain about my job," Kyle snapped back. I didn't understand why he got so angry when he often complained about my housework and child rearing. I didn't believe what Kyle said. There's no way he, who usually avoids trouble, would go to work voluntarily on his days off. I knew this from watching him closely over the years. If he was that passionate about work, he would have stayed at his previous job longer. I'd also started paying attention to the strange smell that Lisa mentioned. Indeed, Kyle came home with a sweet, strong fragrance. This strange smell was not from the factory. Why hadn't I noticed this before? I blamed myself for being so naive and vowed not to make the same mistake again. From then on, I decided to watch Kyle more carefully, especially on weekdays when he said he was going to work. He seemed to wake up an hour earlier than usual and took extra care grooming himself. He appeared to be in a good mood on those days, which varied from week to week, sometimes on a Monday, sometimes on a Thursday. But it was clear that Kyle was happy on those days when he left the house. I went into his room to look for any clues. I felt like a detective searching a house. Since I always cleaned Kyle's room, I knew it well and didn't feel bad about snooping around. If Kyle had hidden anything, it would be in a place not easily seen. I searched carefully under the desk and bed. Finally, hidden in a candy tin in the closet, I found a bunch of letters. What were these? All the letters were from the same person named Patricia. They had been sent through the mail, the oldest letter from 4 months ago and the newest from yesterday. As I read the letters, I saw phrases like, "I regretted when we broke up, but now I really love you, and I want to go back to the time when I was with you." It sounded like something a lovesick teenager would say. At first, I thought maybe Kyle's ex-girlfriend was sending these letters on her own. But then I read a line that worried me. "I'm glad you like me again. I'm looking forward to our next date." This was from last week. It looked like Kyle was seeing this Patricia. Today he was definitely up to something. I took photos of the letters with my smartphone as evidence. I thought about taking the letters but didn't want to make Kyle suspicious. Even with these letters, I felt I didn't have enough proof. After thinking it over, I decided to hire a private investigator to check on Kyle. 3 weeks later, the investigator gave me the results. He brought photos of Kyle and Patricia close together in the park at night, and even a recording of them saying, "I love you," to each other. I accepted the facts calmly. With solid proof in hand, I went to the municipal office and came back with a divorce form. Now that I knew Kyle was cheating, I had no reason to stay with him. I planned to confront him with the divorce papers the next time something happened. I returned home and let out a deep sigh. I was acting resolved, but honestly, I was heartbroken. I was upset with myself for having married someone as careless as Kyle. I was thinking about resting a bit before making dinner when my phone rang. "Hello?" "Yes, Sarah. Do you have time to talk?" "Yes. What's going on?" I was surprised to get a call from my father. He usually doesn't call me. "Actually, your mother and I were talking yesterday and we're thinking about transferring our assets to you soon." "Huh? What happened?" My father ran a company that sold imported goods to Japanese corporations. I was the daughter of a big company president, but I never told Kyle about this. I thought it would make me sound boastful, especially since Kyle jumped from one job to another. We're getting old and thinking about retiring. We thought about keeping the company going but didn't want to push it on to you, our only daughter, so we decided to step back. "I see." I felt guilty about not taking over the company, but my parents respected my decision and had planned for the future. I was touched by their thoughtfulness. "We're thinking of handing over our assets to you. Our total wealth is $17 million, but we're fine with just $3 million. We decided to give you the remaining $15 million. "What? $15 million? I was shocked. That was more money than I could ever imagine earning in my lifetime. "Yes, there will probably be inheritance tax, but you'll still have plenty left. You won't have to worry about living expenses for the rest of your life," Dad said. "Thank you." I expressed my deepest gratitude to my father and mother and hung up. Soon, $15 million would be coming my way. With that money, I wouldn't have any worries, even if I divorced Kyle. No offense to him, but he probably couldn't earn that much. I felt relieved and was in a daze for a while. I glanced at the clock. It was 6:00 p.m. I realized I needed to make dinner and checked the fridge, but there were no groceries left. I got ready to go shopping at the supermarket. My heart was light, but I also felt a sense of urgency that Kyle might come home soon. As I was hurrying across the last crosswalk to the supermarket, the light turned green. "Watch out," someone yelled. But it was too late. My body was already in the air, and then I hit the ground hard. The sharp pain shot through my head, and without understanding what had happened, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was lying on a hospital bed. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes were my parents and Lisa. "Sarah, thank goodness," Mom said. Lisa was crying next to me. I gently stroked her head. "You were hit by a car and broke both legs. They say it will take 5 months to fully recover." 5 months? I felt dizzy thinking about being out of action for so long. From that day on, I was stuck in a wheelchair. Although the nurses took care of me, I felt frustrated and annoyed because I couldn't use my legs. During my stay in the hospital, my parents and friends visited me. My parents were taking care of Lisa now since Kyle was always at work. I thought that was better for her. I was glad everyone visited, but Kyle never came. I started to doubt his care, thinking, aren't we husband and wife? However, 1 week after I was hospitalized, Kyle finally showed up. "Hey, feeling good?" Kyle asked sarcastically. "Yes, man, it's a mess at home without me," I replied lightly. Kyle always complained about my housework as soon as he spoke, showing no empathy. I sighed, thinking he would be at least a little worried about me. "What can I do?" "I was in a car accident," I snapped back. Kyle looked at me with disdain and said, "You're useless if you can't do housework or take care of the child. That's the worst, and you should pay alimony." He said such horrible things to his hospitalized wife. Initially, I had hoped Kyle came to visit out of concern, but he was still disappointing. I sighed deeply. Honestly, I had been thinking about getting a divorce myself. I hadn't expected Kyle to bring it up today, but it saved me the trouble of arguing. "Sure," I said, and Kyle looked surprised when I agreed. "Unfortunately, I know what you're up to," I wanted to say, laughing inside. "Here's a divorce notice." I took out a filled-in divorce form from a bag my mother had brought and held it in front of Kyle's face. "You already had this." Kyle was briefly confused, his eyes wide, but then he took the divorce notice from me and filled in his name and address right there. I felt relieved, knowing I wouldn't have to see Kyle's face ever again. I wanted to tell him the feeling was mutual, but I just watched him leave silently. Probably Kyle would remarry Patricia after the divorce. I didn't know what kind of woman Patricia was, but it was sad to think she was going to marry someone as controlling and unpleasant as Kyle. I felt a bit guilty about Lisa, but deciding to leave was something I had thought about for a long time. I promised myself I would take good care of Lisa. A month after Kyle left, my life was peaceful. The time without my husband nagging me felt like heaven. I was released from the hospital and started physical therapy. I decided to stay at my parents' house until my leg healed. My parents were angry at Kyle when they learned about the divorce, but they stopped pressing the issue when I told them I wanted to forget about him. Lisa didn't seem lonely even without her father around and was happily going to elementary school. In the end, Lisa also noticed Kyle's domineering behavior and probably didn't see him as a father anymore. I was convinced that divorcing Kyle was the right decision, but one afternoon, I got a call on my mobile phone. I ignored it when I saw Kyle's name, but the phone kept ringing nonstop. Eventually, I answered the call. "Hey Sarah, when are you coming back?" Kyle's words made no sense to me, and he sounded like he was about to start yelling. "What do you mean, coming back? You married Patricia, didn't you?" I replied. When I mentioned Patricia's name, Kyle sounded surprised and exclaimed, "How do you know that? Did you think I didn't know you cheated? That's why I asked for alimony." "Yes, that's right, but alimony and child support? I can't pay that." "Why do I have to pay alimony anyway? You, who never did the housework, should be the one to pay," Kyle argued. I was shocked to hear Kyle's argument. I had asked for alimony and child support through a lawyer, but he hadn't paid yet. I knew Kyle didn't have a lot of money, but he should find a way to pay. Yet here he was, saying something ridiculous like I should be the one to pay alimony. "I noticed your affair and gathered evidence. Did you see it from the lawyer?" It seemed that Kyle had already seen the evidence from the detective agency. That would make things easier, but him calling me was ridiculous. "I wanted a divorce even before I found out about the affair because you never helped with housework or childcare, and you complained all the time. I'm not your housekeeper, you know, but it's good you're married now. You have someone else to look after you." But here's the thing, Patricia can't do housework. Before we got married, she said, "Leave everything to me." But once we got married, her cooking is terrible and she doesn't clean. I would have been better off with you. Marry me again. After all, you don't have any money, right? Lisa liked me too, didn't she? Kyle said, which annoyed me. What are you talking about? You divorced me and remarried. You're her partner, not my responsibility. And sorry to say, Lisa doesn't like you. And I have money. Don't lie to me. There's no way you have money. You were a housewife. You can't live without me. I had no intentions of telling Kyle about the fortune I inherited from my parents, but faced with his aggressive attitude, I had no choice but to reveal it. My parents are CEOs. Recently, I inherited their assets. It's around $52 million in total, so I can live without working for the rest of my life. I could almost visualize Kyle gaping on the other end of the phone as he heard about this fortune. You're lying. There's no way you have such a huge amount of money. It's true. If you want, I can have my parents tell you. With that, Kyle finally seemed to believe my words and fell silent. Then he suddenly yelled, "If it's true, why didn't you tell me?" Well, I wanted to tell you, but I knew about your affair and I thought the worst of you, so I thought it didn't matter. At that point, I hadn't yet inherited the assets and there was no issue of property distribution. Kyle bit his lip in frustration. He probably never imagined I had such assets. He must be regretting that he divorced me. But I didn't want to suffer his terrible behavior anymore. Can I hang up now? Please pay the alimony properly, reflect on your actions, and never call me again. Goodbye. With that, I hung up the phone. I immediately blocked Kyle's number so he couldn't call anymore. Mom, who were you talking to? Lisa walked into the room and asked curiously. Just a friend, I replied. But Lisa, do you want to go to the amusement park this weekend? Yes, Lisa smiled happily. Seeing her smile reminded me that her happiness was all that mattered to me. A few days later, I heard that Kyle had broken up with his new wife, Patricia. They argued because she wouldn't do housework, and Patricia ended up leaving him. Kyle, having been divorced twice in a short time, would probably find it hard to get married again. I hoped he would stay single for a while to prevent more people from getting hurt. After the divorce, Kyle lost his motivation and quit his job at the restaurant. He would probably find another job, but it might take him some time to get his life back on track. I felt a bit sorry for him, but his problems were his own doing. I blocked his calls so he couldn't ask me for money, and I avoided places where we used to go together. In my life, Kyle had virtually disappeared. Eventually, Kyle paid the alimony but ended up in debt. I don't know how he'll manage, but I hope he learns from his mistakes. I'm still living comfortably at my parents' house. They told us we could stay as long as we like. After my legs fully healed, I started part-time work at a local flower shop. Even though I don't need to work, I find it better to be active and leave the house. I work hard on weekdays and spend weekends having fun with Lisa and my parents. I feel more joy in life than before and want to keep living happily with the people I love. I cherish these happy moments, especially when I see Lisa's smile.
I'm all set for life marrying into wealth. While you continue to struggle in your modest existence, Bob jeered with a smirk, throwing condescending words my way. His shrill voice pierced the air, disrupting my relaxing break in the hotel lobby. I wondered where he had met his new wife, a president's daughter, no less. Julie, the daughter of Johnson Enterprises. Bob, with his middle-aged man's laugh, seemed oddly proud. But the mention of Johnson Enterprises caught my attention. It sounded familiar. But which company was it? Ah, yes. I recalled the details about Johnson Enterprises, and a proud smile spread across Bob's face. Meanwhile, I struggled to suppress a laugh bubbling up inside me. My name is Amy. I'm 35 and living with my husband, Bob. I work in my family's real estate business, handling mostly administrative tasks. My father, the president, manages the key business strategies. Being an only child, I'm expected to eventually take over the company. With older executives at the helm, I feel the pressure of one day becoming the president. However, I've been careful not to discuss much about our family business with Bob. who only finished high school and works in a moving company. I don't want to bring work matters home, and Bob, feeling somewhat inferior, avoids the topic. Of course, moving is a tough job requiring physical strength and skill, a job for professionals. I don't mind that he only has a high school diploma, but I understand his feelings, so I avoid mentioning my prestigious university degree or my future role as president in our daily conversations. Bob and I met through a friend's introduction in college. My friend had hired Bob's moving company, and he was in charge of her move. Initially interested in my friend, Bob was turned down, but they got along, so she introduced him to me. Our unusual meeting turned out well, as Bob's carefree nature was a good match for my meticulous personality. After several dates, we became a couple in my late 20s, and at the right age for marriage, our relationship quickly led to marriage within a year. Thus began my life as Bob's wife. Our married life started without any issues. Bob's parents were incredibly kind, always welcoming me with smiles during our visits. Considering the common mother-in-law issues among my friends, I felt lucky to have such a harmonious relationship with my in-laws. However, Bob's demanding job often kept him out until late, physically taxing and leaving him exhausted. Despite his fatigue, he never neglected our marital life. While appreciative, I often thought he didn't need to try so hard. Thanks for always waiting up for me. Bob would thank me for simply preparing dinner after his long work days. I felt blessed to have such a wonderful husband, but our peaceful days began to waver a year into our marriage. Hey, why can't we have kids? One night as we got into bed, Bob casually brought up the subject, his tone slightly irritated. It took me by surprise. I had thought about having children too, and although we weren't actively trying, given our regular marital life, I believed it would happen in time. It's just bad timing. We've only been married a year, so it's not something to worry about yet. I reassured him. I definitely wanted children, but knew that rushing wouldn't help. To reassure Bob, I deliberately adopted a relaxed tone and said, "It's still okay, huh? Don't you know for couples not using contraception, there's about an 80% chance of conceiving within a year?" Bob, more forceful than usual, even quoted percentages, 80% within a year. Not well versed in pregnancy statistics, that number seemed incredibly high to me. Really? If you're that eager for kids, should we get tested together? I thought it best to identify and address any clear issues. I proposed that both of us undergo fertility tests, but Bob's response caught me off guard. "What are you talking about? Are you implying it's my fault?" Infertility issues are usually the woman's fault. There's no point in me getting tested. Bob's contemptuous tone, a first for him, stunned me. I hadn't accused him of being the cause. I simply suggested testing since we didn't know where the issue lay yet. However, Bob jumped to the conclusion that I was blaming him and added, "It's definitely the woman's fault," as if to say I was the problem. I wanted to say more, but I was shaking, barely able to reply. Of course, I managed to say, "So just you get tested. I'm too busy with work. I have a job too. You're just a placeholder office lady, right? Just coasting along in a company thanks to your dad's connections." I never just coast at my company. Sure, I do a lot of administrative work now, but I'm also learning management skills from my father for when I take over the company. I'm constantly trying to prove myself, and it's tough dealing with the higher-ups. Bob just doesn't understand my struggles. That night, it seemed pointless to argue with him. Any word I said was met with sharp retorts, and we went to sleep back to back in a heavy atmosphere. From that day on, Bob's attitude towards me changed completely. "I'm home." "What? Dinner's not ready yet? What time do you think it is? Can't have kids. Can't do housework. What a useless wife." One evening, after a late talk with my father about the future, I came home to find Bob berating me for not having dinner ready. "I'm sorry, I just got home 10 minutes ago. I'll start cooking now." "Just wait a little, please," I hurriedly explained. Bob muttered, "That's typical of a small company's boss's daughter." He didn't know, but my father's real estate company was not small at all, with hundreds of employees. But I knew arguing this point was meaningless. I'll cook right away, have a drink, and wait. Bob loved his alcohol. It seemed to calm him down. Relying on alcohol to maintain our relationship felt sad. I hated being berated by him, but if alcohol could soothe him even a bit, then it was worth it. The next morning, Bob's mood hadn't improved. "Make sure dinner's ready when I get home," he spat as he left. I sighed, thinking about my plans for the day. I had taken the day off to visit the gynecologist for fertility testing, as previously mentioned by Bob. Although I was the one who initially suggested the testing, the fact that only I was undergoing it while Bob refused was something I found hard to accept. But complaining wouldn't change anything. If the issue was with me, I needed to start infertility treatment promptly. Bob had been wanting kids, and I too hoped for a child soon. I knew fertility rates differ between the 20s and 30s, so sooner was better for treatment. The clinic was busier than expected, and I was called in for examination an hour after registration. After undergoing a physical examination and blood tests, I was told that the results would be available during my next visit. It would be a shock if the issue was with me, but I was prepared for any necessary steps, no matter the outcome. I resolved not to lose heart. "Bob, I went for the fertility test today." When Bob came home from work, I informed him about the test. "Huh, figures. If the problem's with you, testing's the right thing to do. Let me know the results as soon as you get them," he said. Bob's belief that I was the cause of our infertility frustrated me. The fertility testing required much time and effort, and a bit of understanding from him would have been welcome. 5 years passed, and I turned 35. Though we continued our efforts to conceive, we remained childless, and Bob seemed to have given up on having a child with me. His late nights increased, and sometimes he didn't come home at all. When asked, he said he was out drinking with colleagues, then singing karaoke till morning. His behavior was more akin to a college student and deeply exasperated me. My work had become busier, and the thought of starting a family was pushed aside. But Bob's recent actions were too much. His lack of concern for our home life was clear. One day, after Bob went out on his day off, I observed that he had left his smartphone in the living room, forgetting to take it with him. With that realization, I picked up Bob's phone, intending to take it to his room. It was at that moment that his phone rang, an incoming call from a certain Julie, as indicated by the caller ID. Assuming it was a work contact, I answered to inform them that Bob had forgotten his phone at home. "Hey, Bob, you're late. I've been waiting for 30 minutes. Where are you? If you don't hurry, we'll miss the park opening." The flirty voice on the phone made me catch my breath. "Can you hear me? Hurry up, okay? We haven't had a date in so long." The mention of a date shook me, and I quickly ended the call. My heart wouldn't stop racing. Who was this woman? She mentioned a date, so she likely wasn't a colleague. He's cheating on me. Holding undeniable proof of Bob's infidelity, I clenched his phone tightly. Julie had said it was a long-awaited date, indicating a long-term affair. I trembled with indescribable anger. While I was struggling with infertility, Bob was carelessly cheating on me. His recent distance now made sense. He no longer needed me. Unforgivable. Determined to make Bob pay, I started collecting evidence of his infidelity. It wasn't hard to gather proof. First, I easily unlocked his smartphone using his birth date. The call history was filled with Julie's name. When I opened the messaging app, I found numerous messages between Bob and Julie, filled with embarrassingly affectionate words that made me feel nauseated. I took photos of these pieces of evidence with my phone. After placing Bob's phone back in his room, I spent the day as if nothing had happened. After a month of a strange marriage, my father, the company president, summoned me to his office. "I have something important to discuss with you," he said gravely. Shocked by his words, I couldn't believe what I heard. "Is that true?" I asked. "Yes, so I'm counting on you." Disturbed, I returned to my office, barely concentrating on work. That evening, Bob suggested we separate. Having found evidence of his affair, I had been contemplating when to bring up divorce, but him initiating it saved me the hassle. "Yes, let's divorce." "Really?" Because I had readily accepted the divorce, Bob seemed surprised. Perhaps he was happy about being able to be with his mistress, a woman named Julie. His face was filled with an unmistakable joy that I found irritating. Despite my irritation with Bob's expression, I signed the divorce papers he offered. I can file these tomorrow. I'll be leaving this house. Okay. Are you sure about the mortgage? I anticipated he would want me to leave, so I casually asked. Oh yes, I'm fine. Bob's job was demanding but not high-paying. I doubted he could handle the mortgage alone. But since he initiated the divorce and was the one cheating, I felt no obligation to help. I packed and left the house 3 days later, moving back to my parents' house nearby. My parents initially seemed concerned when I told them about my divorce. But when I explained that Bob had cheated on me, they became furious. They repeatedly reassured me that it was the right decision to part ways with such a man. I threw myself into work, trying to forget about Bob. Before I realized it, a year had flown by. I was so engrossed in my work that I lost sight of everything else. It was astonishing. One day, while relaxing in the living room, my dad approached me. Why don't you take a break and go on a trip? It's going to get busy starting next month. Guess he thought I'd been working too hard and needed a distraction. Indeed, I have been overwhelmed with various things lately and felt mentally exhausted. Thinking a little trip wouldn't hurt, I took up Dad's suggestion and decided to travel to the Northeast. It was my first solo trip, and I was both nervous and excited. The air in the Northeast was crisp and seemed to cleanse my weary soul. Interacting with the locals who helped me navigate and chatting with the owner of a bar, I found everyone to be incredibly kind, which gradually healed my spirit. I had booked a hotel in Seattle, the most famous and largest around here, thinking, why not enjoy the trip to the fullest? After checking in, I relaxed in the lobby with a welcome drink. The fatigue from the journey seemed to melt away, feeling utterly comfortable. Jokingly considering moving to Seattle, a familiar voice called out, "Ha! Hey, what are you doing here?" I spun around, startled by the unmistakable voice of my ex-husband, Bob, entering the lobby with 2 large suitcases and a young woman in her early 20s. She had flawless skin, bold makeup, and striking red nails, despite the chilly Northeast weather. Wearing a short skirt with bare legs, I stared at Bob and the woman in disbelief, unable to contain my curiosity. "Why are you here, and who is she?" I blurted out, even though I wasn't sure if I wanted to know. "Oh, let me introduce you. This is Julie, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon. Guess what?" "She's a wealthy businessman's daughter," Bob exclaimed, appearing genuinely happy and volunteering information I hadn't asked for. However, the name Julie struck a chord, the same name as the person on the phone. Disgusted that he was with such a young girl, I felt a surge of discomfort. "You're on a solo trip here. That's pathetic," Bob sneered, despite being the one who cheated and initiated our divorce. Julie, too, was looking at me with narrowed eyes, her tone carrying amusement. "Hey, Bob, is this your ex-wife? She looks old. Hurry up with the check-in." Irritated by her catty tone, I glared at Julie. Bob nonchalantly wrapped an arm around her waist, responding, "Yeah, I'm set for life marrying into money. You can keep struggling in your poor life." Bob's high-pitched voice echoed through the hotel lobby, disrupting the elegant atmosphere I was enjoying and leaving me feeling upset. His mention of marrying a businessman's daughter made me wonder where he had met someone like that. "Yeah, Julie is the daughter of Johnson Enterprises," Bob proudly stated, his middle-aged laugh seeming childishly proud to me. I pondered, feeling that Johnson Enterprises sounded familiar. After a moment, I recalled it. "Oh right, that company." Bob's face lit up with pride. "Impressive, huh?" he explained. However, I was secretly holding back laughter inside. "Come on, you know this company. Her family's loaded, and they even paid off the mortgage on that house quickly. Thanks for divorcing me so easily, Amy." His tone was dripping with sarcasm, but it didn't bother me at all. "Yeah, I know them. They're in the biggest building downtown, right? I've seen it and even been there," I replied calmly. "Oh, you've been there?" Bob seemed surprised. It's quick then. Her family owns a huge company, so they're loaded. Breaking up with you was the right choice. Bob smirked nastily, but I simply nodded, still calm. That building, it's part of our real estate holdings, I mentioned casually, as if I just remembered. Bob and Julie both asked in unison, "What do you mean by our real estate?" That building is rented by my father for his most prestigious office. I don't know if your company is involved in real estate, but it's not a shabby building, I explained calmly. Both seemed skeptical of my words. I hesitated for a moment, but there was no turning back now. Telling Bob about my company wasn't my concern anymore. Yes, I know how grand it is. I was there when my father bought that building. It was about $200 million, I think. But recently, Dad was complaining about a tenant not paying their rent. Turns out it was your company. In fact, my father is a real estate magnate with assets worth $3.2 billion. The building Johnson Enterprises is in is one of them. The tenants of the building change regularly, but currently it's Johnson Enterprises. For the past few months, they hadn't paid their rent, and that's what was troubling my father. Rent not paid. Julie looked shocked, but then she burst out laughing. That can't be true. Our company's doing great. We can surely pay the rent. I'm not falling for such a lame lie to drive a wedge between Bob and me. Her shrill voice echoed in my ears. I let out a deep sigh. It seemed like a reasonable conversation with this woman was impossible. Pulling out my smartphone right there, I decided to call my dad. "Dad, I'm here with the daughter of Johnson Enterprises. Can you send me a photo of the reminder notice for the rent?" I quickly relayed my request, and Dad sent a photo of the rent reminder notice for Johnson Enterprises. Showing it to Bob and Julie, I doubted they could suspect it was fake, given the speed. "See, you can tell, right? 3 months of unpaid rent. If you don't pay soon, we might have to sue." "What are you going to do?" At the mention of a lawsuit, Bob and Julie's faces turned pale. Come to think of it, Dad has been really on edge lately, yelling about sales and firing a lot of employees, Julie mumbled, sounding unsure. Seeing her, Bob shouted in despair, "Lies. You're just trying to trick us and tear Julie and me apart, aren't you? You're still that kind of person, trying to get back at me for remarrying. Your tactics are dirty." Startled by Bob's loud voice, I took a step back, hearing Bob's accusations of dirty tactics. Memories of all the heartless words he had hurled at me during our marriage flooded back. Determined to confront Bob, who was now gloating about marrying Julie, a wealthy businessman's daughter, I prepared myself to tell him the truth. "What are you even saying? Do you really think I still have feelings for you? How foolish. I've long been fed up with a man like you. In fact, I've been feeling sorry for Julie, who got caught up with you. Did you marry her just for her money? You married me for shallow reasons too, like wanting to get married quickly or wanting kids. And who was it that left me when he found out we couldn't have kids? Who insulted me, calling me useless for being infertile? You're to blame for all of it, yet you think I still like you. You must be out of your mind." I unleashed my pent-up frustrations on Bob, feeling a wave of relief. Bob, on the other hand, seemed infuriated, trembling with anger. "You're just an arrogant old hag. You probably can't even get married or have kids anymore. Julie and I were planning to have fun making a baby after this trip, and now you're accusing Johnson Enterprises of not paying rent." Panicked upon realizing the poor performance of Johnson Enterprises, Bob was desperate to blame all his misfortunes on me, deciding to deliver the final blow. I calmly said, "Oh, I didn't mention it, but I'm 4 months pregnant. I'm in the stable phase of my pregnancy, so Dad suggested I take this trip to relax. Of course, I have my doctor's permission." That's right. After divorcing Bob, I had found a new love, my boss at work and a subordinate of my father. He supported me mentally when I was struggling, encouraged me at work, and fully supported me. I found out I was pregnant with his child just 3 months ago. Knowing about the baby, I immediately married him. It was a quick marriage, but the company celebrated it grandly. My pregnancy was going smoothly, and encouraged by my father and husband, I embarked on this trip. And just before breaking up with Bob, my father had told me he was retiring as CEO next month. He decided to retire after being diagnosed with diabetes and thinking it was time to step down. Therefore, I would inherit my father's assets. This made it easier for me to accept the divorce from Bob. Even without Bob, I knew I could live a full life. The word pregnant slipped effortlessly from my lips, leaving Bob shouting, "What? You're pregnant? So, were you using birth control when we were married? What's going on?" Bob stomped his feet in complete confusion. "Birth control? I never did that. Remember, I told you I had infertility tests at the clinic, and they found no issues. So the problem was with you. Too bad." As I bluntly told this to Bob, his face twisted visibly. The problem was with me? Does that mean Julie and I can't have kids? Why did I divorce you and marry Julie? Bob muttered to himself, shoulders slumped in defeat. "What do you mean? Why?" I felt betrayed, knowing he was infertile. Julie snapped, angry at Bob's selfish reasoning. Realizing I couldn't bother with them anymore, I said my final words. "That's why from now on, please don't involve yourself with me and Julie. Regarding the rent for Johnson Enterprises, I won't back down until it's fully paid. If you plan to continue renting that building, please pay the overdue rent soon. Otherwise, we'll have to take legal action. I have nothing more to say to you two, so goodbye." I left Bob and Julie arguing and confidently walked back to my hotel room. After returning from my trip, my husband greeted me with a smile, saying, "Welcome back. Sorry I couldn't help around the house. Was everything okay?" "Of course, it was fine. I'm glad you got to relax, Amy." "Thank you." My husband smiled warmly at me, and I felt a great sense of relief. Since marrying my current husband, I've been reassured every day, completely forgetting about Bob. Since that trip, I haven't met Bob. The following is what I heard through my father's contacts. After that incident, Bob and Julie's fights became incessant. Despite thinking he was marrying into wealth, Bob discovered Johnson Enterprises was in deep debt. Coincidentally, news was all over TV about a Johnson Enterprises employee embezzling millions of dollars from clients. Julie's father knew about the fraud, but tried to cover it up for the company's reputation. However, once the scandal became public, Johnson Enterprises' stock plummeted, having lost its credibility. The company saw a mass exodus of employees. In such a state, they couldn't possibly pay the rent. So my father was taking legal action against Johnson Enterprises. The future of the company looked bleak, entirely Johnson Enterprises' fault. Bob, having lost a fortune he thought was within his grasp, was furiously blaming everyone but himself. Thinking he could ride on the coattails of wealth was overly optimistic of Bob. Julie, realizing Bob was infertile, accused him of marriage fraud. Furthermore, after our hotel encounter, I had a lawyer demand compensation from Bob for his infidelity, leaving both him and Julie in debt. I heard that Bob and Julie ended up arguing every time they saw each other, and they finally got divorced recently. Then, unbelievably, Bob called me after divorcing Julie. "Amy, please marry me again. I have debts." Other than the alimony, Julie made me buy everything she wanted and then left without paying a dime. "You're the only one I can rely on. I'll do anything for you. Please forgive me." Bob's pleas, sounding like a beggar, were so pitiful that they almost made me sick. His unchanged attitude of marrying for money was just appalling. "No, I have no desire to be involved with you ever again. I'm going to be happy with my husband and our child, so please don't contact me again. Goodbye," I said calmly, and then immediately set his phone number to be blocked. That should stop any more absurd calls from Bob. Having lost his wife and money, Bob will likely live a lonely life now. Given his infertility, remarriage might be difficult for him. Moreover, it's hard to imagine someone falling for a person like Bob who mocks others so readily. All I could think was that he should at least try to repay his debts. I thought about it as if it were someone else's problem. As for me, I'm looking forward to my life with my husband and our soon-to-arrive baby. Both my work and personal life are more fulfilling than ever, and I'm savoring this unparalleled happiness.